Chapter 534. Eric raised his eyebrows slightly and did not answer. Instead, he asked, "What do you think is the purpose of a company going public?" "To raise funds so that the company can develop better. So Firefly is not short of funds now, and its development is obvious to all. So, do you think it is necessary for Firefly to go public?" The reporter was not discouraged and immediately asked, "Mr. Williams, are you satisfied with the status quo and do not intend to continue to expand Firefly Pictures?" "Of course not, but if you want to expand Firefly Pictures territory, there are many ways to obtain funds, and it is not necessary to go public. I have my own complete plan for the development of Firefly, and some development ideas may even cause a lot of controversy. I don't want to waste my time explaining to those old men on Wall Street every time I make a decision after going public. Everyone is in the news industry, and you should know very well how difficult it is to deal with those people. Well, let's end this question here. Let's return to the theme of today's press conference." Listening to Eric's slightly teasing tone, the reporters present chuckled. They all knew the meaning of Eric's words. Although the relationship between Hollywood and Wall Street was quite close, in fact, the game between the two sides was more than cooperation. Wall Street pursued a company's high growth rate and high return on various operating indicators. Most investors often did not value long-term development and only wanted to see beautiful financial reports. The element of speculation was very large. The operators of companies often valued long-term development more, and many times, they would sacrifice short-term interests for this purpose, which formed a difference with Wall Street's concept. If a company did not go public, Wall Street, of course, would be like a dog biting a hedgehog. "I don't want your funds, and you can't meddle in my territory." If you chose to go public, even if the control was still in the hands of the business operator, as long as the company's development footprint deviated from the track envisaged by Wall Street, it would still be constantly criticized by Wall Street investors. Today, the investment bank published a bearish article. Tomorrow, the Wall Street tycoon would fiercely criticize it. In the face of the resulting fluctuation in the stock price, if a company did not compromise, it would not be peaceful. The most extreme example was, of course, the Marvel Entertainment Group that Eric had been quietly following. In the 1980s, Marvel Comics had been doing very well, and had even almost swallowed up Warner's DC Comics. But since the comic company fell into the hands of Wall Street investor Ron Perlman at the end of the 1980s, it ushered in a life full of disasters. Ron Perlman was only interested in capital operations and had no intention of running the company. Until now, Ron Perlman had extracted hundreds of millions of dollars of profit from Surprise Entertainment, but Surprise Entertainment's operating condition had been declining, almost to the point of bankruptcy. There were countless speculators like Ron Perlman on Wall Street. In some of Eric's memories from his previous life, MGM Pictures finally got rid of the casino tycoon Kirk Cochran in 2005, but not long after, it became a toy in the hands of another Wall Street speculator, Carl Icahn. In the following years, MGM repeatedly faced bankruptcy crises, and its operating condition did not improve at all, but Carl Icahn made a lot of money. All this information made Eric have a deep fear of Wall Street. Firefly Pictures was the foundation of Eric's career, and the career he was most passionate about. So Eric had never planned to let Firefly Pictures go public. Some of the high-tech companies that Chris helped him manage were the capital that Eric prepared to expand his territory in Hollywood. No one knew the development prospects of Cisco, AOL, Yahoo, and other companies better than Eric. If Firefly Pictures needed a large amount of funds to expand in the future, Eric could sell the shares of Cisco and other companies or get Yahoo and other companies listed to obtain a large amount of development funds. Moreover, even if he lost control of these companies in the future, Eric did not care too much. As a rising industry, the internet was very much a bubble. Cashing out in time was the wisest choice, and there were still countless investment opportunities in the internet in the next 20 years. After Eric said these words, he directly handed the microphone to Ed Kamal on the other side. After Eric's reminder, the reporters did not continue to ask about Jurassic Park and Firefly Pictures. Instead, they focused on Firefly software. This press conference quickly generated a huge response in the media inside and outside Hollywood. Many people knew that this was the digital field's first counterattack against the recent poaching. The purpose was to prevent Autodesk from entering the special effects software market and maintain the digital field's leading position in the industry. After the conference, Carol Bartz, the chairman of the board and CEO of Autodesk, said in an interview that Autodesk would not give up on entering the film and television special effects software market. However, a few days later, news came out that Autodesk's board of directors had a disagreement on the strategy of entering the film and television special effects software market. This was because the lethality of Firefly's move was too great. Although Autodesk only needed half a year to launch a mature special effects software, it was estimated that Firefly software had occupied 90% of the market in this half a year. And Firefly software also had an advantage that Autodesk did not have, which was the digital field, a giant in the special effects industry. The cost and technical advantages generated by the close cooperation of these two companies were definitely incomparable to Autodesk, which could only produce tools, but did not have its own experimental field. Although Autodesk had previously reached some cooperation intentions with Industrial Light and Magic, the two parties were two companies after all. It was impossible for them to cooperate as intimately as Firefly Software and Digital Field. Subsequently, Industrial Light and Magic's approach also confirmed Autodesk's concerns. Only a week after the Firefly Software conference was held, Industrial Light and Magic announced to the public that they had decided to use Firefly Software's products. The day of the announcement was accompanied by an intimate handshake photo of George Lucas and Firefly Software's CEO, Ed Kamal. George Lucas' approach was of course a helpless move. Although Industrial Light and Magic also had a set of independently developed software tools before this, their performance was completely incomparable to the digital field. If they gave up on the cooperation with Firefly Software this time, then Industrial Light and Magic's CG special effects production level was likely to be worse than those third-rate special effects studios using tools such as Maya. In that case, Industrial Light and Magic would definitely decline rapidly. When the news of the cooperation between Industrial Light and Magic and Firefly Software came out, Autodesk's board of directors directly rejected the management's proposal to establish a special effects software department. While establishing Firefly Software, Eric and the management of Firefly also began to work hard to retain the digital field employees. They adopted a series of measures to increase their salary and benefits. Digital Field did not stop the employees who insisted on leaving. Instead, they encouraged these employees to set up their own special effects studio and rely on Digital Field as an affiliate. They also promised these studios that not only could they use the special effects software at a discounted price, but they could also receive a certain number of outsourced projects from Digital Field. This measure could indirectly keep these people in Digital Field's camp and weaken the competitiveness of their opponents in another way. This measure was very attractive to many people. Continuing to be an employee in another company was not as comfortable as being their own boss, even if it was just a small studio boss. After this measure was implemented, some micro special effects companies that originally had nothing to do with Digital Field also expressed their desire to join Digital Field's camp in hopes of receiving the corresponding benefits. Digital Field also selectively accepted a batch of them. Because these small special effects companies affiliated with the Digital Domain camp relied too much on the Digital Domain headquarters in terms of technology and projects, Eric wasn't worried that there would be another behemoth that would threaten the Digital Domain. In fact, this method also accelerated the expansion of the Firefly special effects software tool. More than a week later, the resignation storm in Digital Field finally subsided. Stimulated by this incident, in order to ensure that similar incidents would not happen in the company in the future, Eric began to formulate an equity incentive plan for all of Firefly's member companies. Through the equity incentive plan that covered the entire company, it deepened Firefly's sense of belonging and cohesion to Firefly's employees. During this process, Pixar's second 3D animation, The Bug Crisis, was officially released on more than 2,500 screens in North America. This insect-themed animation attracted a large number of audiences of all ages with its interesting characters and plot that was suitable for both young and old. It received $33 million in box office on its first weekend, and was expected to reach $50 million in the first week. Although it could not be compared to the box office of Jurassic Park in the first week, The Bug Crisis was already in the ranks of the hottest blockbusters. The cost of this 3D animation was only about $70 million. Based on the North American box office trend, the film could basically recoup its cost by releasing it in the North American market. As an animated film, the profit from the licensing of Bug Crisis was the biggest source of profit. In just 3 days after the movie's release, hundreds of Disney stores in the United States generated nearly $12 million in sales. By the way, the products of Jurassic Park were also released at the same time as the movie was released through Disney stores. In nearly a month, the sales of the products had successfully exceeded $100 million. Eric deliberately imitated the original and gave a few clear close-ups of the products of Jurassic Park in the movie. Moreover, the history seemed to be surprisingly similar. Because of Dr. Hardman's granddaughter Lex, a series of pig teammates in the movie, the girl's figurine image became the most unpopular product of Jurassic Park. Eric forgot to remind them of this, causing Disney's toy factory to produce a batch of Lex's figurines in advance. As a result, the other characters' figurines were out of stock several times, but not even half of the original batch of Lex's figurines were sold out. Staying in Los Angeles meant that one was busy. Often, other things would come one after another before one could finish the things on hand. Of course, most of the things were related to the movie. Although the direct profit generated by Firefly's movie business was getting smaller and smaller in the company's total profit, no one could underestimate this area. The movie business was like the engine of a movie company. Only when the engine was powerful enough could it lead the other businesses to develop quickly. After deciding to give up on the acquisition of Mike Mira, Firefly Pictures restarted the Black Ant brand and set up a specialized indie film investment department. After a period of screening, some scripts were sent to Eric one after another. After Quentin Tarantino shot to fame with Drowning Dog, he happily played around in many B-movies for 2 years. Finally, he remembered that he still had work to do. After Eric's urging and advice, Quentin finally took out the script for pulp novel. Eric also gave some suggestions based on his memory of the original, such as the choice of the male and female lead, as well as the classic twist dance. Perhaps many people who had watched pulp novel did not understand what was so classic about the twist dance performed by John Travolta and Uma Thurman. However, when the movie was first released in North America, many North American audiences who had experienced the popularity of the movie would have tears in their eyes when they saw this scene. It all started in 1978. That year, Paramount Pictures released a very anti-traditional musical film, The Hot Prodigal. The male lead of the movie was John Travolta from pulp novel. As soon as the movie was released, it immediately caused a sensation among North American teenagers. At half the price of the movie in the 1990s, the movie took the North American box office of $170 million. It was no surprise that it won the box office that year. Moreover, the movie also led the popular disco trend and set a sales record for the soundtrack that had not been broken for many years. Hot Prodigal happened to have a lot of scenes where the male lead played by John Travolta had a dance competition with people in a disco. Many years later, Pulp Fiction recreated the classic scene from Hot Prodigal more than 10 years ago through John Travolta and Uma Thurman participating in a twist dance competition in a dance hall. The effect was just like how Brother F.A. appeared on the screen wearing a trench coat and biting a toothpick many years after Heroes. It was as emotional as Brother F.A.'s appearance on the screen in a trench coat with a toothpick in his mouth. If a more vulgar word was used to describe this feeling, it would be called feelings. Chapter 535. In addition to pulp novel, Assassin Leon, which was recommended by Paris Disneyland CEO, Patrick Schneider, was also officially launched. France's Gaumont Film Company originally intended to invest in Luc Besson's new film alone, but they were more than happy to cooperate with Hollywood's Firefly. For this reason, the chairman of Gaumont Film Company, Nicolas Seydoux, personally flew to Los Angeles. When Paris Disneyland opened last year, Eric attended a party hosted by the Seydoux family when he went to Paris. The two parties had met once. Since the other party was so serious about this matter, Eric personally took the time to invite the other party to a banquet to show his respect. Gaumont Film Company had a history of nearly 100 years in France. It was one of the few film companies in France that specialized in producing commercial films. Maintaining a cooperative relationship with such a French local would play a very important role in further opening up the French film market. Because he was at Firefly Studios in the morning to check on the post-production progress of several of the company's films, Eric chose Venice Beach as the location for the banquet. After the two had dinner, they chatted for a few hours in a cafe before Nicolas Sado left. After seeing the other party off, Eric continued to sit by the window and drink coffee. Today was July 1st. It had been nearly half a month since he returned to Los Angeles. The chaos caused by the resignation crisis in the digital domain had passed. Because they were prepared in advance, although Pixar's 3D animation Bug Crisis still performed very well at the box office, Pixar did not experience the same situation as the digital domain. Of course, several other Hollywood film companies were jealous of the huge box office profits brought by Bug Crisis. However, although Pixar's first Toy Story only cost $40 million, the cost of the second Bug Crisis had skyrocketed to $70 million. It was completely at the level of a blockbuster. Although the other 6 major film companies could afford this production cost, they had a 2-year production cycle and lacked production experience. In addition, the other 6 major film companies did not have Disney's rich peripheral operation experience and perfect Disney's retail network. Most of the companies were hesitant about whether to develop their own 3D animated films. However, Eric is the one who understands the prospects of 3D animated movies the most. He knows that even without the peripheral operation system on the internet, the commercial prospects of 3D movies are very broad. In the original spacetime, almost every year in the next 10 years, there will be 3D animated movies in the top 10 of the Hollywood box office. Therefore, Eric was already considering expanding the scale of Firefly's 3D animation department to at least release one 3D animation every year. Thinking about these things, Eric saw Alan walk in from the entrance of the coffee shop. For a period of time, Eric also wanted to get himself a new assistant. It would be best if it was a beautiful woman with exquisite looks and ability. Unfortunately, this matter ended in failure. Eric wanted to let Jennifer Connelly, who received a degree in history of Stan last year, try it out. Connelly was also enthusiastic at first, but the girl interned in his assistant's office for less than a month and directly quit because of the complicated work. The girl was a Persian cat, and her small brain was not very smart. She was more suitable for a comfortable life. Now, her life was to occasionally take 1 or 2 movies to show her presence. The rest of her life was to enjoy life. She flew around the fashion capitals of the world, participated in various fashion activities, and followed the trend with interest to create a clothing brand under her own name. A lot of money was spent, but there was no result. Eric didn't care. The last thing he lacked now was money. As long as the girl was obedient, he could do whatever he wanted. Alan walked to his side and said, "Mr. Lin just called." According to the current box office trend, the North American box office of Jurassic Park will exceed $300 million next week. He asked me to ask if the company wants to prepare a celebration party. From June 4th to now, Jurassic Park had been in theaters for 4 weeks, and the total box office had reached $280 million. Although the weekly box office had now dropped to about $30 million, and the release of Collision next week might bring a big drop in the box office of this dinosaur movie, the total box office of Jurassic Park next week would not be a problem for the total box office of Jurassic Park to exceed $300 million next week. Eric looked at his watch. It was already 3:30 in the afternoon. Collision would be released in North America tomorrow. In the evening, he would attend the premiere of the movie in Los Angeles. Tomorrow, he would fly to Europe again to attend the premiere of Jurassic Park in Berlin. In late July, he might also go to Asia. As the largest film market in Asia, Eric also needed to personally appear at the premiere of Jurassic Park in Japan. It could be said that he still had to live the life of a flying man throughout July. Let's postpone this matter. At present, Most of the main creators of the movie are promoting the movie in Europe. Without them, there is no point in holding a celebration party. Let's wait until the global box office of the movie breaks $1 billion. According to the global release schedule, the total box office of the movie may not break $1 billion until after October, or even November at the latest. Then after October, I don't care about the next few months, Eric said. The celebration party of the global box office of the movie breaking $1 billion is more meaningful to Firefly. That's it for now. Is there anything else? Alan shook his head. No, the premiere of Collision starts at 7 o'clock. You can sit here until 5:30. Eric smiled and finished the coffee in front of him. He stood up and said, "The 3 female leads of Thunderbolt have been training in Santa Monica. I haven't seen the other 2 yet. Since there are still 2 hours left, let's go take a look." "I'll arrange a car." Alan nodded and walked out. The 3 angels had been training for more than 2 months. Even Kate Beckinsale, who couldn't even do basic skills like splits at the beginning, could now perform a complete set of boxing skills. The martial arts director invited by Firefly was a member of the famous Yuan family troupe across the ocean. The head of the Yuan family troupe would definitely not come personally to teach the 3 girls. The one who came was the 3rd son of the Yuan family, Yuan Shiren, the wretched old man who sold the Buddha's palm in Kung Fu Hustle. As for Firefly's request for him to train the 3 girls for 3 months, Yuan Shiren actually did not quite understand it. According to his view, nothing could be achieved in 3 months. If he wanted to be a hit girl, he definitely had to start training from a young age. It was better to use more stunt doubles during filming than to start training halfway. However, Firefly's salary was very generous. Coupled with the fact that the Hong Kong film industry was declining, there were only a few people left who could live comfortably. Of course, Yuan Shiren wouldn't refuse an invitation from a Hollywood movie giant at this time. As the training entered the last stage, the actual combat segment had already begun. In the spacious training room, the 3 girls were fighting with a few martial arts masters from the Yuan family troupe. From time to time, they would laugh and laugh. Of course, the martial arts masters couldn't really attack the girls. They just carefully fed them moves. Yuan Shiren stood at the side with his arms crossed. From time to time, he would give a few instructions. The door of the training room was suddenly pushed open. A Chinese young man came over and whispered a few words in Yuan Shiren's ear. Yuan Shiren immediately waved his hand to stop the few people fighting in the field. "Okay, that's all for now. Take a break." After explaining this matter, Yuan Shiren followed the Chinese young man out of the training room. In a lounge next to the training room, Yuan Shiren opened the door and saw Eric, who just got up from the sofa. He quickly greeted him and shook hands with Eric. He said in somewhat choppy English, "Hello, Mr. Williams." "Hello, Mr. Yuan." Eric shook hands with him. The 2 of them sat down together. Only then did Eric say, "I just happened to have some time, so I came over to see how Kate and the rest's training is going." Yuan Shiren could still understand these simple English words. Moreover, the Chinese young man beside them was also a translator provided by Firefly. There was no problem with the 2 of them communicating. "Mr. Williams, other than Miss Beckinsale, the other 2 girls have a very good foundation. The 3 of them are improving very quickly. Even if the movie starts immediately, there won't be a problem." Eric nodded with satisfaction. "Then after the filming of Thunderbolt Charming Baby starts in the future, I'll have to trouble Mr. Yuan to continue to be the action director." Yuan Shiren quickly replied, "Of course, no problem. I'll do my best." "Oh right, Mr. Yuan. Mr. Wu is also filming another movie in Los Angeles. Have the 2 of you met?" "Yes, I've even had a few meals with him." Yuan Shiren replied with a hint of envy in his tone. After the success of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, White Pigeon Wu was immediately promoted to a Hollywood A-list director. At this time, he was filming another movie that Eric gave him, Broken Arrow. This movie was the script that Eric gave him after talking to Peter Guber last time. In the original space-time, Broken Arrow's results were not as good as Face/Off. However, because it was a co-development with Columbia, Eric naturally wanted to keep the best for himself. After White Pigeon Wu finished filming Broken Arrow, it wouldn't be too late for Firefly to invest in Face Slash Off on its own. The two of them chatted in the lounge for a while before Eric stood up. He planned to go to the training room next door to check on the three girls. Yuan Shiren had also heard of some of Eric's achievements. In addition, today's training was almost over. He said, "Mr. Williams, today's training is almost over. I won't be accompanying you. You can take the three of them and leave directly." Eric was stunned for a moment, but he quickly smiled and said, "All right then. You should go back and rest too." After the two of them said goodbye, Yuan Shiren called a few of his apprentices and left the training room together. Eric sent Yuan Shiren and the others off before walking to the training room. Penelope took a drink from the female assistant that the company assigned to the three of them. She took a few big gulps and sighed. Last 2 weeks. Just 2 more weeks and we'll be free." Charlie took a towel and wiped the sweat on his body. He said, "It's still early. Who knows, maybe the filming will be more tiring. But it definitely won't be as boring as it is now." Penelope returned the drink to the female assistant and took the towel. On the other side, Kate found her clothes from the clothes rack and took out a pack of cigarettes. She then walked to the balcony on the south side of the training room. Because of the hot weather, the training room was even more stuffy. The other two girls saw Kate Beckinsale's actions and followed her to the balcony to get some fresh air. There were no chairs in the training room, so the three girls pulled out a sponge cushion and sat down. "Do you want one?" Kate lit a cigarette and took a deep puff before asking the two girls beside her. Charlie turned around and glanced at the training room. Only their bespectacled assistant was packing up. The others were nowhere to be seen. She took a cigarette from Kate and lit it up. Penelope saw that the two girls had started smoking without being left out, so she lit one as well. When Eric came in from outside, he saw that there was only a black-haired girl with glasses in the empty training room. Seeing her, the black-haired girl's face immediately became a little nervous, which made Eric feel very strange. Although he was a little confused, Eric still asked, "Where are the three of them?" The girl hesitated for a moment, but still reached out and pointed at the balcony exit. She hoped that the three girls had finished smoking. Otherwise, if they were caught red-handed by this young man, who knew what would happen? Eric touched his cheek, feeling a little strange about the girl's reaction. However, he still walked towards the balcony. When he arrived at the entrance, Eric saw that the three girls were sitting cross-legged or leaning forward on a green sponge cushion. The three of them each had a cigarette in their hand and were smoking happily. Eric shrugged, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He finally understood the reason for the girls' reaction just now. Eric absolutely didn't like to see girls smoking, but he didn't dislike it either. However, looking at the three beautiful women in tight-fitting training clothes in front of him smoking together, he had a strange feeling. Thinking of this, Eric took 2 steps forward and squatted down beside Kate, who was on the far left. He took out a cigarette from the cigarette box beside her leg and waved it at the three girls who were stunned when they saw him. "Can I have one too?" It wasn't until Eric picked up the lighter and lit the cigarette that the three girls jumped up like frightened cats. They threw away the cigarette butts in their hands and said awkwardly, "Mr. Williams, hello." Eric nodded and looked at the three girls who looked like they were waiting to be criticized. He smiled and said, "I just happened to be free, so I came to see how your training was going. I didn't expect to see this scene. If I had known, I would have brought my camera. After you become famous, if I have a photo like this, I can sell it to the tabloids and make a lot of money." Chapter 536. Hearing Eric's slightly teasing tone, the three girls pulled the corners of their mouths together, but they couldn't laugh out loud. Penelope was extremely regretful at this time. She even hated Kate, who was standing beside her. If it weren't for the smoking pipe's instigation, she would never smoke here. Among the three of them, she was the least addicted to smoking, and this was the first time she smoked during training. She didn't expect to be so unlucky as to be caught red-handed by Eric Williams. Although Eric Williams didn't seem to be angry, this bad impression was definitely left. Charlize also felt a burst of regret at this time. She secretly swore that she would never touch this thing again. Kate Beckinsale, on the other hand, quickly relaxed after the initial worry. She was born in the British middle class, and her family situation was much better than the other two girls. Although her biological father died early, her mother and stepfather had some connections in the British film and television industry. Even if she lost this role and returned to the United Kingdom, she wouldn't have to worry about not having a role. Therefore, after a short period of worry, Kate even secretly sized up the legendary Hollywood youth in front of her. Although she knew that the youth in front of her was only 23 years old, Kate didn't see any of the arrogance and impetuousness that young people of this age often had in Eric. His every movement carried the calmness and indifference of an adult who had experienced the world. Eric stood up when the three girls jumped up in fright. He leaned against the balcony railing and looked at the three girls in the corner with a smile. He smiled and shook the cigarette box in his hand. "Whose is this?" Penelope and Charlize looked at Kate together. Kate, who had already relaxed, finally couldn't help but feel nervous when Eric spoke and the other two girls cast their gazes on her. In fact, Eric had already expected that the cigarette in his hand was Kate Beckinsale's. There were definitely a lot of female celebrities who smoked in Hollywood, but there were not many who were known to be addicted to smoking. Kate was one of them. This somewhat maverick British rose had been photographed by paparazzi more than once smoking in public. Even in front of the camera, she had no intention of hiding it. Facing Eric's gaze, Kate was just about to muster up her courage to say something when she saw Eric leisurely put the pack of cigarettes into his pocket. He then looked at the two girls beside her and said, "Charlie, Penny, help me keep an eye on Kate. Don't let her smoke again. At least not before the contract for Whopper Girls is completed. No matter who informs me that Kate is smoking again, your pay will be reduced by 10% each time." When the three girls heard Eric's words, their eyes widened. Penelope couldn't help but point at Kate. Then what about her? Eric revealed a slightly mischievous smile. "Kate's pay will remain unchanged." At this time, Kate finally opened her mouth. "Mr. Williams, it's all my fault. If you want to deduct my pay, then deduct mine. It has nothing to do with Charlize and Penny." Eric shook his head gently. "No, if you don't feel bad about deducting your pay, then deduct theirs." Ever since the first date, Charlize had always had an inexplicable grudge against Eric. When she heard Eric's outrageous punishment, she finally couldn't help but raise her voice. "You're really unreasonable." Eric looked at Charlize's delicate face that still had some baby fat. He resisted the urge to reach out and pinch it. "I'm so busy. I don't have time to reason with you." Eric ignored the three girls who were rolling their eyes. He extinguished the remaining half of the cigarette in his hand and threw it into the trash can at the side. He clapped his hands and looked at the girls who were still standing in front of him. "Go and change your clothes. Mr. Yuan said that your performance in the past 2 months was very good. As a reward, I'll treat you to the premiere of Clash of Heaven and Earth tonight." The three girls looked at each other. Penelope took the lead and walked towards the training room. Kate followed closely behind. Charlize originally wanted to say something, but the moment her gaze met with Eric's, she immediately avoided his gaze. She walked into the training room reluctantly. Kate and Charlize walked into the changing room one after another. They saw that Penelope had already taken off her training clothes, leaving only her sexy underwear. However, the Spanish girl was not in a hurry to change into her usual clothes. Instead, she took out her makeup tools from her bag and started to carefully apply makeup in front of the mirror. When Kate saw this, she couldn't help but tease. "Penny, I don't think you need makeup. As long as you go out wearing this, Eric Williams will definitely be infatuated with you." Penelope was unmoved. She frowned and said, "Humph, you still dare to say that? If you didn't encourage me and Charlize to smoke, such an embarrassing thing wouldn't have happened." Kate didn't feel too burdened. She said while changing her clothes, "Don't worry. At most, I won't smoke for the next few months. Who knows if you can endure it or not." Charlize folded the training clothes she took off and put them in the closet. While the other two girls were bickering, she said, "Hey, haven't you guys thought about why Eric Williams suddenly came to see us?" Kate had just put on a little t-shirt that exposed her navel. She held her jeans in one hand and put one hand on her waist in front of the full-length mirror, striking a sexy pose. She looked at the fair and seductive girl in the mirror and said narcissistically, "Do you even need to say it? It's too obvious. But I definitely won't let this playboy get what he wants." After Kate finished speaking, she looked at Penelope with a look of disappointment. Penelope couldn't stand Kate's gaze. She retorted, "What are you doing? You have a boyfriend, but I don't." Kate said unhappily, "Who told you that I have a boyfriend? Then who's the guy who called you last weekend? I just met him during the filming of Much Ado About Nothing. I didn't agree to be his girlfriend." Charlize listened to the two girls muttering in silence. After changing into her casual clothes, she looked at Penelope, who had just finished putting on her makeup and was slowly putting on her clothes. She couldn't help but untie the ponytail that she had tied up because she was practicing martial arts. She looked at the dressing mirror not far away and used her fingers to fix her hair. Because it was summer, the three girls were wearing very light clothes. In addition, they were at the age of blooming flowers. They exuded a youthful aura from head to toe. Eric couldn't help but have a feeling that his eyes lit up. Noticing the slight change in Eric's expression, Penelope was slightly happy. She came over and asked, "Mr. Williams, where are we going next?" Eric pointed outside and said as he walked, "I originally wanted to let you guys show up on the red carpet to promote Thunderbolt Girls. Now forget it. If the three of you appear together, I'm afraid that Clash of Heaven and Earth will steal a lot of the attention tomorrow. Let's wait until the press conference for Thunderbolt Girls." Penelope ignored the two girls behind her. She followed Eric step by step and said, "Then this time I'll arrange for you guys to go in directly. After the premiere, I'll treat you guys to dinner. How about that?" "Okay, but I heard that there's usually a party after a movie premiere. Do you want to go? We'll listen to your arrangements." "Oh, forget it this time. I have to go to Europe tomorrow. It's not suitable for me to stay out too late. I won't bring you guys to the party. Next time." "Okay." Penelope quickly nodded obediently. Charlie and Kate, who were behind Eric and Penelope, heard the conversation between the two. They curled their lips at the same time, but did not object to Eric's arrangement. Eric took the three girls downstairs and asked the girls to squeeze into the back seat of his car. He then got into the front passenger seat and told the driver to drive. Even though the premiere started at 7 o'clock, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, a long red carpet was laid out outside the Chinese Grand Theater on the Walk of Fame. The two sides of the red carpet were filled with media and movie fans who came to attend the premiere. Of course, Eric couldn't bring the three girls straight to the Chinese Grand Theater. Instead, he stopped at a hotel not far away where the main cast of the movie and the guests of the premiere were temporarily staying. He handed the girls over to the staff and began to socialize. When the stars saw Eric appear, they all came over to greet him. Eric socialized for a while before he walked over to the director of Clash of Heaven and Earth, Roland Emmerich. "Eric, congratulations. The box office of Jurassic Park is amazing." "Thank you, Roland. I believe that Clash of Heaven and Earth will also achieve great results," Eric said. He then greeted John Landau, who was in charge of Clash of Heaven and Earth, and asked, "What were you guys talking about?" John Landau was originally the exclusive producer that Eric prepared for Cameron. However, Cameron only made a movie once every 2 or 3 years, so Eric asked Roland Emmerich to partner with John Landau on Clash of Heaven and Earth. From the results were very good. Hearing Eric's question, John Landau pointed at Roland Emmerich and said, "Roland is still a little worried about the box office of Clash of Heaven and Earth. This is the first movie that he invested more than $50 million in. To be honest, I'm a little nervous too. Because of the amazing box office results of Jurassic Park, as the second CG special effects blockbuster released by Firefly this summer, it attracted as much media attention as Jurassic Park. The final production cost of the two movies was almost the same." Eric could understand the psychological pressure that Roland Emmerich was under. However, compared to Roland Emmerich, Eric was much more relaxed. Starting from the earliest Noah's Ark, Roland Emmerich had nearly 10 years of experience as a director. His personal style was very mature. With Eric's personal supervision, this version of Clash of Heaven and Earth was definitely much better than the original in Eric's opinion. Moreover, it was still 1993. CG special effects had just become popular a few years ago. The North American film market, and even the world's film market, were still in a state of hunger for CG special effects blockbusters. Clash of Heaven and Earth would definitely achieve a good box office result. Eric didn't hide anything. He told the two of them his thoughts. Roland Emmerich also knew that Eric's words made sense. He nodded in agreement, but the anxiety on his face didn't dissipate too much. Eric also knew that only real box office results could make Roland Emmerich feel completely relieved. This was a common problem for many directors before the release of their movies. Even Eric himself felt a little uneasy before the release of Jurassic Park. Therefore, he didn't comfort him too much. The press conference for the premiere was arranged after the screening of the movie, so the red carpet was much simpler. Eric walked leisurely across the long red carpet, signed his name on the signature wall, and quickly entered the theater. When he was about to reach his seat in the front row, Eric heard a slightly accented female voice on his left. "Mr. Williams." He turned his head and saw three girls sitting side by side. Penelope was talking and waving at him. Eric nodded slightly. Many people greeted him along the way, so the girls' behavior didn't attract much attention. However, Eric felt that this Spanish girl really didn't hide her thoughts at all. Compared to the careless Kate and the inexplicably resistant Charlie, Penelope was like a little wild cat that pounced on him without hesitation. In his memory, a certain big-mouthed male star in Hollywood gave Penelope Cruz a very appropriate nickname, Troublesome. In the original space-time, ever since this hot Spanish girl entered Hollywood, she almost always had a scandal with the male lead in every movie she filmed. Because of this, she even broke up a few couples, and was jokingly called the professional Hollywood mistress. In his previous life, after Tom and Nicole parted ways, he was very high-profile with Penelope for a period of time. It was obvious that he wanted Penelope to be the third Tom's wife. However, the reason why the two parted ways again, in Eric's opinion, was probably because Tom felt that he couldn't control this restless seductress, so he made such a decision. Thinking of this, Eric became a little interested. He wanted to see what kind of small waves this seductress could stir up in this space-time. Eric found a seat and sat down. The host of the premiere said a few words and announced the start of the screening. The lights in the theater quickly dimmed, and the familiar opening of Firefly Pictures appeared on the big screen. After many revisions to the script, this version of Collision was very different from the original version. It could even be said that they were two completely different movies. Many of the side plots that were incompatible with the movie's theme in the original version were removed. After the discovery of the comet that was about to hit Earth, Roland Emmerich focused on the three main characters: the federal government, the female reporter Jenny Lena, and the boy who discovered the comet, Leo Bademan. Through the skillful interweaving of the plot and clever suspense setting, in the first 40 minutes of the movie, the audience in the theater was tightly grasped. During one of his astronomical observations, the boy Leo Bademan discovered a comet that had never appeared on the star chart. So he reported this news to his mentor. Later, an astronomer calculated that the comet's orbit would overlap with the Earth's. In other words, the comet was about to hit the Earth. When the astronomer anxiously wanted to pass the news to the federal government, an accident happened. There was a big suspense in the plot, and then the time jumped directly to a year later. The female reporter Jenny Lena was tirelessly investigating a scandal. In the end, the breakthrough of the matter was fixed on a woman named Ellie. In the process, the federal president suddenly appeared, hoping that Jenny Lena could stop the investigation. Jenny refused the president and continued her investigation. The final discovery surprised her. It turned out that Ellie was not a person, but a comet that was about to hit Earth. At the same time, the boy Leo, who discovered the comet last year, was still living an ordinary life in a small town like many American high school students. No one was aware of the impending disaster. When Jenny gradually got closer to the truth, the federal government finally decided to publicly reveal the truth to the public. Jenny was also invited to be the first to ask the president at the press conference. It turned out that although the astronomer had an accident in the process of transmitting the news, The news that the comet was about to hit Earth was still discovered. In order to solve this crisis, several large countries joined forces and spent a year building a space shuttle loaded with nuclear bombs. They planned to use nuclear bombs to blow up the comet before it hit Earth. However, in order to avoid causing panic as much as possible, the governments of each country unanimously chose to hide the news. The plot began here, and Roland Emmerich's ability to control the plot began to show itself. Just like the 2012 movie in Roland's memory, every minute was thrilling. Starting from the launch of the space shuttle to the comet, the decision of the Federation government, the fate of the small fry, and the struggle of human nature under the disaster, it all grabbed the audience's attention. When the first failed attempt to blow up the comet, causing part of the comet to crash into Earth, and cause a huge tsunami scene appeared in front of the audience, many exclamations could be heard in the theater tomorrow. The tsunami scene was about 10 minutes long, and it was completely created with the most advanced CG technology in the digital field. Compared to the miniature model shooting, which could be distinguished at a glance, the CG shot made it difficult for everyone to distinguish the real thing from the fake. When the monstrous wave crashed into New York, and the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building collapsed one after another, there were even exclamations of "Oh my God!" in the theater. Eric sensed the reactions of the audience in the theater, and leaned over to Roland Emmerich, who was sitting next to him, and whispered in his ear, "Roland, you can rest assured now. Maybe we can find some time to discuss your next movie. What do you think of the script of Poison Day?" Other than some film critics, most of the people invited to the premiere were hardcore movie fans. Even these people had such an obvious and strong reaction to the movie, so it was impossible for the movie not to cause a sensation among ordinary audiences. Roland Emmerich knew this very well. "If you can spare some time, of course I'm fine with it," Roland said in a relaxed tone. "But I heard that you have to go to Europe tomorrow. I don't know when you'll be back." "That's not a problem. If I have to do everything personally, then what's the point of being a boss?" The two of them smiled at the same time. Seeing that the movie was about to come to an end, Eric whispered to the person next to him and got up to go to the bathroom. Although most of the people in the theater were focused on the screen, when Eric got up, some people still noticed his movements. Penelope glanced at Kate, who was staring intently at the screen, carefully got up from her seat, and chased after the figure that she had been watching disappear. Kate, who was a little insensitive, didn't care when she saw Penelope get up. Charlie, on the other hand, kept watching Penelope's figure until he saw the Spanish girl disappear into the exit that the man had just passed through. He muttered something in a low voice. He was a little unwilling, a little depressed, and a little inferior. Soon, these emotions were focused on the man, so Charlie gritted his teeth and became angry. He couldn't focus on the movie anymore. "This is my only chance. If I miss it, I don't know when I'll have to wait for the next time," Penelope thought in her heart. She had already passed through a small door and arrived at a corridor. She just happened to see Eric's figure disappear around the corner, so she chased after him without hesitation. As soon as the Spanish girl turned the corner, she immediately bumped into someone. Just as she was about to apologize, she heard Eric's voice. "Girl, are you looking for someone?" Penelope stood still and noticed Eric's teasing gaze. Not only did she not feel embarrassed, but she boldly looked at Eric and said, "Mr. Williams, what a coincidence." "Yeah, it's quite a coincidence," Eric said with a smile. He continued to take a few steps forward and pushed open the door of the men's bathroom. He went in to relieve himself. After he came out, he saw the Spanish girl standing in front of the sink, putting on light makeup on her face. Eric obviously wouldn't refuse the prey that was sent to his mouth. He turned on the tap next to the girl and washed his hands. He whispered in the girl's ear, "There's no one inside. Do you want to go in and take a look?" Penelope's body stiffened. After a moment, she gave Eric a charming smile. Her wild eyes had a little bit of provocation. "Okay, as long as you're not afraid of being discovered." Eric led the girl into the men's washroom and placed a sign outside the washroom that said, "Cleaning is in progress." Chapter 537. In the theater, the screening of Clash of Heaven and Earth had already ended. The audience and reporters were still immersed in the CG disaster scene of the tsunami hitting Manhattan. They were all asking questions to the director, Roland Emmerich, and the other main creators. Not many people noticed that Eric had left early. Like many other fans who were invited to the premiere, Kate stayed in the theater and marveled at the disaster scene. She noticed Charlie's absent-minded look, and looked at the empty seat on the other side for a while before she finally realized something. She asked, "Where's Penny?" Charlie pouted at the stage. Kate looked over, and found that Eric was not on the stage. She quickly reacted and covered her mouth in surprise. "No way, Penny. So fast?" Charlie cursed in a low voice. She did not want to stay any longer. She got up and was about to leave. A young man in his 30s walked along the aisle and said to the two girls, "Miss Beckinsale, Miss Theron, I'm Mr. Williams's assistant. He had something to do at the last minute, and asked me to apologize on his behalf. I'll treat you to dinner next time. He also asked me to send you back." The two girls looked at each other strangely, and then looked at Ellen together. Alan also felt a little embarrassed, but he could only shrug helplessly and make an expression that everyone understood. After a short silence, Charlie said, "Sir, we can go back by ourselves. You don't have to send us back. You can call me Alan, Miss Charlie. We met a few months ago at Firefly Cineplex," Alan explained and said. "The car is already outside the theater. It's just the end time now. It's not so easy to get a car." Kate heard this and gently pulled Charlie. She said to Alan, "Thank you, Alan. Let's go." After returning to Santa Monica's place and thanking the driver, Kate said to Charles, who had been silent for a long time, "Don't worry about it. You don't look any worse than Penny. You definitely still have a chance." When Charlie heard this, she glared at Kate angrily. "What are you talking about? I'm not." Kate took out half a bag of snacks from the movie and popped one into her mouth. She glanced at Charlie with a sneaky smile and said, "Since you don't have it, open the door. I don't have the key." Charlie took out a bunch of keys and walked to the door as he tried to explain, "I just think that Penny is too." At this point, Charles paused. Even when he opened the door, he couldn't find a suitable adjective. Too utilitarian? Wasn't she a utilitarian as well? How many people in Hollywood didn't pursue their dreams of stardom? Too licentious? It wasn't accurate either. If it wasn't for Eric Williams, with Penelope's personality, she wouldn't have stuck to him so openly. Clash's midnight box office is $2.68 million, surpassing Batman, to take second place in North America. Los Angeles Times after tornado, another classic disaster film came out of nowhere. Collision showed us the disaster scenes that could only exist in our imagination in the past with amazing CG special effects. San Francisco Chronicle, Clash's outstanding midnight box office results once again prove the huge commercial prospects of CG special effects films. It is conceivable that after more than 80 years of development, Hollywood will once again usher in a new round of fundamental technological changes after sound films and color films. Chicago Tribune, when Jurassic Park was still crazily reaping profits in North America, and even in the global box office, Firefly Pictures once again released an amazing special effects film. The midnight box office of Clash also undoubtedly proved its amazing commercial value. At the same time, a week ago, Firefly Pictures' digital domain announced that its special effects software series would be sold to the public. Hollywood was excited about this. But what worries me is that as Hollywood films become more and more commercialized, the new generation of directors, including Eric Williams, James Cameron, and Roland Emmerich, have forgotten the artistic nature of films. They only pursue the most dazzling visual effects and the most blatant monetary benefits. Firefly Pictures even submitted 0 nominations at last year's Oscars. This is a pity. It was already the next morning. In the dining room of the Sharp Corner Manor, Eric was leisurely reading the new day's newspaper while eating breakfast as usual. While reading an old critical article by a conservative Hollywood film critic in the Chicago Sun, Eric felt a slight sound behind him. He turned his head and saw Penelope walking barefoot like a cat. "Good morning, little wild cat." Eric smiled and said hello. He pointed to the kitchen and said, "I made breakfast for 2. Your portion is in the kitchen." Penelope, who hadn't put on any makeup, had lost some of her wildness and gained a hint of elegance. Hearing Eric call her a little wild cat, Penelope smiled a little awkwardly and said good morning softly before tiptoeing to the kitchen. After being trained by Eric for an entire night, the wildness on the Spanish girl's body had disappeared without a trace. She now looked more like a lazy house cat. After last night, Eric ate a little, but Penelope fell asleep due to exhaustion. The girl was also very hungry now. When she walked to the dining room with breakfast, she could not help but pick up a piece of bread and put it in her mouth. Eric saw Penelope's eager expression and could not help but tease her again. You look more like a little wild cat now. Are you starving? Penelope did not speak, but sat down beside Eric obediently. Eric was very satisfied with the Spanish girl's attitude now. It seemed that last night's torment was not in vain. He continued to read the newspaper in his hand and said, I'll call later. You can rest today and don't have to go to training. It just so happens that tomorrow and the day after tomorrow are the weekends. You can rest until next Monday. Of course, if you still have energy, I can also ask someone to send you to Santa Monica. Eric, can I stay here? Eric looked at the Spanish girl with a smile and nodded. Of course, you can stay until Monday before leaving. But I have to go to Europe today, so I can't accompany you. Penelope bit her lower lip gently. She believed that Eric just understood the meaning of her sentence. However, since Eric refused, although she was a little unwilling, the girl did not dare to ask for a yard after last night's lesson. Eric was very satisfied with Penelope's action of knowing when to stop. He continued to read the newspaper in front of him. When the Spanish girl finished her breakfast, she took the initiative to clean up her and his tableware. When he sat beside her again, Eric took out a credit card from his shirt pocket and handed it over. Penelope looked at the Citibank VIP credit card on the table and raised her right hand that was on her knee. She quickly suppressed the thoughts in her heart and put them down. Eric, I don't want it. I'm not doing it for money. If you are doing it for money, I will give you a check, not a credit card. Eric looked at the Spanish girl and said, You have to know that not every girl can get a credit card from me. This card is equivalent to a contract. I think a smart girl like you should understand the content of the contract, so you can also choose not to accept it. Just treat last night as a beautiful memory. Of course, if you encounter any problems in the future, I will help you appropriately. Penelope's eyes were filled with struggle. Of course, she knew what Eric meant by contract. After hesitating for a while, the girl suddenly asked, Eric, how much money is in it? Eric's mouth flashed a triumphant smile and said, I didn't deposit any money in it, but I remember that the highest overdraft limit should be $50 million US. When Penelope heard the figure of 50 million, her hand, which was originally on her knee, couldn't help but tremble. As a girl born in an ordinary family in Spain, she had been looking forward to living a decent and wealthy life since she was a child. However, so far, the largest amount of money she had personally experienced was the remuneration for Thunderbolt Beauty that she had yet to receive. Although Firefly paid her $250,000 after deducting the tax, agent's share, and expenses in Los Angeles, it was estimated that she would only receive a few tens of thousands of US dollars. However, even this amount of money was enough to make Penelope secretly happy for a long time. After all, the remuneration she received from the movies in Spain was less than 10,000 US dollars. And now, after just one night, a credit card worth 50 million US dollars fell in front of her. Before seeing the luxurious life in Hollywood, even if this amount was subtracted by a zero, Penelope felt that it was worth it to sell herself. Penelope raised her hand again and suddenly asked, Eric, what if it's lost? Eric laughed out loud. If it's lost, just report it and then get another one. You don't think that it really belongs to whoever finds it, right? Penelope smiled awkwardly and didn't hesitate anymore. She quickly reached out her small hand and took the card. She placed it in the palm of her hand and curiously rubbed it. Remember, this is a contract. Once you sign it, you can't go back on it. You still have one chance. Before you leave the Point Manor, if you feel that it's inappropriate, just leave the card here. Eric, I've already thought about it. The Spanish girl didn't hesitate to lean over and hug Eric's arm like a cat. Eric pinched the girl's sharp chin and said, "Think about it again." Penelope didn't respond. Instead, she continued to rub Eric's arm and said, "Eric, it's still early. You're definitely not in a hurry to catch the plane, right?" Eric ignored the girl's hint. He got up and said, "I have to go to the company first. Let's go, help me pack my luggage." Penelope looked at Eric's unmoved figure and stood up in disappointment. She thought for a moment and suddenly walked up to Eric and said, "Eric, there's something I want to ask you for help with." "What?" I want my sister to come to America to study." Eric suddenly stopped and turned to look at Penelope. He saw a flash of guilt in the girl's eyes and suddenly smiled. "Of course, no problem. What's your sister's name?" "Her name is Monica." "Oh." Eric nodded calmly and said, "Just wait for my call. I'll get someone to contact you." After Eric finished speaking, he didn't continue to ask. Penelope followed behind Eric and gently waved her small fist. "Even if I can't catch this man, what if I have a sister who looks like me?" With this thought in mind, the Spanish girl began to think of some small schemes. Of course, she couldn't see that Eric, who was walking in front of her, also had a slightly playful smile on his face. This is really interesting. Eric couldn't help but think. Some images of Monica Cruz flashed in his mind. To be honest, the Spanish sisters were really not much different from twins except for their age. At 9 o'clock, Eric took a car and left the Pointed Corner Manor on time. The Spanish girl was obviously reluctant to leave immediately and stayed there alone. Eric wasn't worried. With Penelope's shrewdness, she definitely wouldn't do anything out of line. Eric went to Firefly's headquarters to arrange some things. Then he took the Disney Group's chartered plane to New York. He stayed in New York for a few hours to visit the two little guys who still lived in Long Island. Only then did he leave again amidst Virginia's complaints and fly directly to Berlin, Germany. Berlin time was 9 hours later than Los Angeles time. Eric left on July 2nd. After more than 20 hours of flight, he arrived in Berlin at 5 o'clock in the morning on July 4th. This day happened to be Independence Day in the United States. Of course, it definitely had nothing to do with Germany. However, because of this incident, Eric remembered another thing. It seemed that the title of the next script he prepared for Roland Emmerich, Independence Day, was in the hands of another film company. In the original space-time, there were many disputes because of this title. Although the project Independence Day had been revealed to the outside world, Firefly had not officially announced the title of the movie. After settling down in Berlin, Eric promptly called Los Angeles and asked Firefly's production department to pay attention to this matter. Eric was not too worried. In the original space-time, the title of Independence Day was originally Earth Defense War. Sometime before the movie was released, the film company finally obtained the authorship rights and set the premiere on July 4th. It was basically a gimmick. Of course, this gimmick also played a certain marketing role, but it was definitely not necessary. If the film company with the authorship rights demanded an exorbitant price, Eric would not insist on being a sucker and insist on getting the title. The premiere in Berlin did not have any surprises or waves. The Firefly branch in Germany arranged everything in an orderly manner. After Eric arrived in Berlin, he simply understood some of the procedures before the premiere and smoothly completed everything that followed. Before Jurassic Park was released in Germany, it had already caused a worldwide sensation because of its amazing box office and realistic CG special effects. In addition, the German branch spared no effort in the operation. Unsurprisingly, the movie also quickly broke box office records in the German market one after another. Chapter 538. Thinking about Rachel telling her to take the initiative, Carolyn took a deep breath and lightly patted the stack of newspapers in her hands. Only then did she use the spare room card that Eric had given her to open the door to Eric's suite. It was already 8:30 in the morning. Carolyn had acted as Eric's interpreter last night and attended a cocktail party with him. Of course, she didn't drink much. However, Eric couldn't resist the enthusiasm of the host and drank a little too much. As a result, he hadn't gotten up yet. After eating breakfast, Carolyn went to a nearby park for a walk. Coincidentally, she bumped into Alan, who was preparing today's newspaper and was planning to wake Eric up. Alan had a very good impression of this girl who had politely greeted him. He also knew that Carolyn liked Eric, so he took the initiative to provide her with an opportunity. Pushing open the door to the luxurious suite, Carolyn stuck her small head into the room to take a look. Seeing that there was no one in the living room, she walked in. Placing the newspaper in her hands on the coffee table, Carolyn walked to the bedroom door and lightly knocked a few times. "Wait a moment." A voice immediately rang out from the bedroom, giving the girl a fright. Before she could react, the bedroom door was suddenly pulled open. Then a man and a woman stood there in a daze. Eric had just woken up and thought that the person outside was Alan. Just then, he remembered that he had forgotten to do something yesterday and planned to get his assistant to call Los Angeles. Without thinking, he opened the door. Carolyn had never had the experience of waking a man up. How would she have thought that Eric would run over to open the door for her in just a pair of boxers? The girl was originally a little petite. After opening the door, her gaze first fell on Eric's muscular upper body. Then, she let out a cry and turned around, her hands unconsciously covering her burning hot face. Eric, who was originally in a daze, was awakened by the girl's tender cry. Seeing Carolyn covering her face with her hands, he couldn't help but laugh. Turning around, he picked up his clothes and put them on. He teased, "Running over so early in the morning to take advantage of me. AI, this time I've suffered a big loss. I just don't know if I can earn it back." Carolyn gently stamped her feet. Even though she knew that Eric was joking, she couldn't help but defend herself. I just came here to deliver the newspaper to you." Hearing the trembling in Carolyn's voice, Eric knew that this girl was shy and did not dare to continue teasing her. He quickly put on his clothes and said, "Okay, you can turn around now." Carolyn originally wanted to run away, but she knew that her face was definitely covered with a layer of red cloth. If she were to be seen by others like this, they would definitely laugh at her. Therefore, she resisted the urge to run away. However, when she heard Eric's words, the girl was unwilling to turn around. Her back was still facing Eric as she said, "Go wash up first, Mr. Eric. I'll help you call for breakfast." "Okay, thank you." Eric didn't refuse and walked into the bathroom. More than 10 minutes later, Eric walked out of the bedroom again. Carolyn's figure had already disappeared without a trace. Eric smiled and shook his head, feeling a little emotional. It was impossible to find such a simple and shy girl in Hollywood. After coming to Europe again, Eric made a phone call to London according to their original agreement. He didn't expect Carolyn to rush over on the same day. Of course, Eric understood the girl's feelings for him. However, the more he understood Carolyn's pure and innocent character, the more Eric felt that perhaps he should let the girl continue on her original path of life. The Vanity Fair of Hollywood was definitely not suitable for such a simple-minded girl. Bringing her in would only bring her harm. As he thought about these things, Eric thought that Carolyn didn't help him call for breakfast. Just as he was about to pick up the phone and call the restaurant to send some breakfast over, the hotel's waiter rang the doorbell. The German premiere of Jurassic Park had been held a few days ago, but the Paris premiere was on July 14th. Eric was still touring the corners of Berlin during the day, and he couldn't avoid all kinds of invitations at night. Germany was the most developed country in Europe, and its economic strength was once on par with Japan's after the war. If it weren't for the influence of the Cold War, Germany's economic strength would definitely not be much worse than Japan's, the world's second-largest economy. However, even so, Germany's national strength was still the strongest in Europe in this era. Its GNP was even comparable to the sum of Britain and France, which were ranked second and third in Europe. The development of the economy also meant that they had a lot of money in their hands. Although the Germans didn't lack a sense of security like the Japanese, they were also very keen on investing abroad. Because of the stimulation of special tax policies and the rapid development of Hollywood, investing in Hollywood movies was currently one of the most popular ways to invest in Germany. In order to stimulate the development of movies, the German government stipulated that the Germans didn't have to pay taxes on the funds invested in movies, and Germany's personal income tax was as high as 51%. In other words, if you earned 1 million a year, if you didn't invest it, you would have to pay 510,000 in personal income tax. But if you invested this money into movie production, this 1 million wouldn't have to pay any personal income tax, which was equivalent to the investor investing 510,000 in taxes. And if this 1 million was doubled in profits from the movie and became 2 million USD, then after paying the personal income tax, the remaining money was basically exempted from the original personal income tax. Moreover, even if this fund didn't double and only earned a small part of it, it was equivalent to being exempted from a part of the tax to a certain extent. With this idea, although the risk of movie investment was very high, there were still many German investors who dauntlessly threw large amounts of money into Hollywood. The two movies that Carlock Pictures failed miserably this summer, The Bear Peak and The Last Action Hero. Most of the production funds came from German film funds. Strictly speaking, Firefly's Jurassic Park increased the loss of these two big productions to a certain extent. Schwarzenegger's recent action hero was basically crushed by Jurassic Park. However, when Eric arrived in Berlin, he was still eagerly pursued by many German film companies and film funds. After experiencing the failure of The Bear Peak and The Last Action Hero, the Germans had also learned to be smarter. They understood that it wasn't safe to simply invite big stars to make blockbusters. Finding the right investment target was the safest. Now that Jurassic Park was crazily breaking box office records around the world, Firefly Pictures was definitely the most suitable investment target. During Eric's days in Berlin, most of the invitations he received were from some lobbyists from German film foundations. At the same time, he also began to consider this problem. At present, the average budget of a major Hollywood film company was still about $30 million per movie, and the publicity budget was not too high. With the average production of 20 movies per year, the required production funds could be easily digested by Firefly's internal cash flow. At present, Firefly Pictures rarely brought in external film production funds. However, with the arrival of the era of big-budget movies, the total publicity budget for each movie in the future was likely to easily exceed $100 million. Although Eric was still very confident that Firefly could also withstand such a huge demand at that time, it was not cost-effective to do so. With Eric's understanding of Hollywood over the years, he understood that Hollywood's biggest advantage was to use other people's money to make movies and earn their own profits. Because of the high risk of film investment, in general, Hollywood's external investors did not make as much money as imagined. The funds invested in Hollywood could generate a profit of 10% to 15% per year, which could be considered a very generous return. Of course, because other film companies did not have Eric's golden finger, film investment always had losses and profits. Therefore, they could rely on Hollywood's ingenious internal sharing rules to keep most of the profits for themselves and transfer more of the losses to external investors. However, this rule was not so useful for Firefly. Other people were gambling when they made movies, but Eric, who could see through the dice, was not. Take the recent Jurassic Park as an example. If you brought in external investment for a movie with a global box office of $1 billion, and you told the investors that the business did not make money at the final settlement, it would be strange if the investors did not make a fuss. After all, most of Hollywood's movies now introduced a project operating mechanism of many investors' co-production in order to reduce the investment risk. However, for Firefly, this risk was much smaller in front of Eric. It was completely within Firefly's scope of tolerance. At this time, according to Hollywood's rules, it was not sharing the risk but sharing the profits. Until breakfast was over, Eric still did not figure out a more feasible operation plan, and the simple breakfast was already past 9 o'clock. Today happened to be Monday. The box office of Jurassic Park for the new weekend did not exceed the forecast of Firefly's statistics department, and Collision performed much better than Eric expected, earning more than $47 million at the North American box office. It was expected that the box office for the first week would exceed $70 million, directly reaching the cost line. The total box office for Pixar's 3D animated film, The Bug Crisis, also exceeded $100 million in North America. When he was about to finish reading the newspaper in his hand, the doorbell rang again. Eric opened the door. This time it was Alan. You came just in time. A few days ago, I asked Disney to collect information on some potential computer animation studios. Take some time today to ask them for me and see how they're preparing. If they're ready, send me a copy of the information. I know. Is there anything else? Alan nodded and wrote it down. Eric shook his head and suddenly said, Also, don't let Carolyn do this kind of thing. She's too shy. It was a little awkward just now. Alan seemed to know something. He smiled a little and said, I'm sorry, Eric. I didn't think that much. By the way, why are you here? Miss Wilson asked me to ask you if you're going out to play today. Alan's face became more teasing. Eric looked at his watch and nodded. Okay, I'll go over now. She's waiting for you downstairs. Alan said one last time and turned to leave. Eric had already decided on his itinerary for the day. He decided to go to the Museum Island in Berlin to take a look. He went back to his bedroom and changed into a pair of shoes. After tidying up a little, Eric walked out of the room. Carolyn, who was sitting in the lobby of the hotel downstairs and flipping through a magazine, looked normal. However, when she saw Eric appear, the girl couldn't help but blush. It made Eric have the urge to pinch her cheeks. To be honest, this thought had been in his mind more than once. Let's go. Although the thought in his mind was very evil, Eric didn't show it. After politely greeting the girl, he let her out. At this time, Berlin wasn't very prosperous. Because of the Cold War, most of Berlin was controlled by the Soviet Union, and the capital of Germany was moved to Bonn in the west. However, after the merger of East and West Germany in 1990, everyone unanimously decided to move the capital back to Berlin. With the strong economic strength of West Germany, the infrastructure of Berlin was built very quickly. The public transportation system in Berlin was very developed, or rather, the public transportation system in the whole of Germany was very developed. Neither of them drove. They walked side by side to the subway station. Eric only brought 2 bodyguards with him. Soon, they took the subway to Berlin's famous Museum Island. The name Museum Island sounded very strange. In fact, it was a group of museums formed by the Berlin Museum, the National Gallery, and several other museums. Eric wasn't very interested in German culture. To be honest, because of the long period of turmoil in Europe, Germany really didn't have any culture to show. In fact, many people could find that whether it was the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Greece, or other countries, most people could talk about a series of cultures and tourist attractions with relish. However, Germany was an exception. If you mentioned Germany to people around you, their first reaction might be Hitler. This wasn't a glorious history. Although Carolyn's personality was abnormally shy, the girl's knowledge could be described as profound. Many things that museum lecturers didn't necessarily know, she could often mention easily. Eric curiously asked about this matter, and the girl's answer didn't surprise him. Eric could only sigh and be envious. Although he had inherited all the memories of his previous life, after his rebirth, Eric didn't have the ability to remember everything he saw. As time passed, some of the originally clear memories of his previous life gradually began to dissipate. Chapter 539. After spending a day visiting the museums on Berlin Museum Island, the two of them finally walked out of the History Museum at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Carolyn was still in high spirits. The two of them walked to the side of the street, and the girl pointed to the west. The Brandenburg Gate is just ahead. It's only 1 kilometer away. Eric, do you want to take a look? That's Germany's Arc de Triomphe. Okay. Eric nodded. Since it was so close, there was no need to take a car. Eric walked along the street towards the destination. Carolyn walked to Eric's right. She glanced at Eric's side profile from the corner of her eyes, then quickly looked away like a thief. Her little head spun a few times before she found a topic to talk about. Eric, after looking at the museum for a whole day, do you have any inspiration for a movie? Sensing the girl's clumsy conversation, Eric smiled and nodded. Yes. Carolyn moved closer and looked up at Eric. Then, can you tell me about it? Of course, Carolyn. Have you ever thought about a possibility? If the exhibits in the museum suddenly came to life, what would happen if they all came to life? I haven't thought about it. The girl shook her head honestly. Eric laughed. Then what do you think of when you look at the exhibits? Their age, their artistic value, or the historical events involved? As she spoke, the girl couldn't help but lower her head and murmured, Eric, am I very useless? I only know how to remember things from books. Of course not, Carolyn. You don't know how amazing you are. I envy your little head. As Eric spoke, he raised his arm slightly and wanted to pat the girl's head. However, considering the girl's shy personality, he gave up on this action. Noticing Eric's actions, Carolyn shrunk her neck slightly. She couldn't help but feel a little hopeful in her heart. However, when she saw Eric retract his hand, she couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. But actually, I know that they often say that I'm a bookworm behind my back. Eric stopped in his tracks and turned around to look at the petite girl before him. Solemnly, he said, Carolyn, you mustn't think that way. Those people who are talking about you are definitely jealous. Excellent memory is a gift given to you by God. The more knowledge a person has, the easier it is to draw inferences and do things that ordinary people can't do. Carolyn's eyes sparkled as she looked at Eric. After he finished speaking, she nodded her head vigorously like a student being praised by her teacher. Thank you, Eric. Eric imitated the girl's slightly raised British aristocratic accent. You're welcome, Caroline. Hee, Carolyn laughed. Oh right. What about the inspiration you mentioned just now? Oh, it's like this. We can create a scenario where the male lead finds a new job as a night watchman at the Natural History Museum. On his first night of duty, when he is patrolling the eerily empty museum, he suddenly hears a strange sound. Eric briefly explained the main storyline of Night at the Museum. Before he finished, he realized that the girl beside him was looking at him with a little adoration in her eyes. Eric was even certain that if he were to buy a lollipop and pass it to her now, this girl with a Lolita aura would immediately follow him home. How evil. Eric, what's next? Carolyn asked when she saw that Eric had suddenly stopped narrating the story. Eric shook his head. He didn't want to continue trying to impress Carolyn. I haven't thought of what's next. You know, the script isn't that easy to write. Carolyn instinctively defended Eric. It's okay. It's already very impressive. I definitely wouldn't have thought of such a fun story. I think that if it were to be made into a movie, it wouldn't be much worse than Jurassic Park. I hope so. Eric smiled. Carolyn was a little dissatisfied with Eric's perfunctory tone. She nodded her head firmly. That's for sure. The Brandenburg Gate was one of the more famous scenic spots in Berlin. There were many tourists around it. The two of them came to the nearby Paris Square. To avoid being surrounded by people, Eric quickly put on his sunglasses. Carolyn also took out a pair of sunglasses from her handbag. After thinking for a while, she put it back. The girl felt that there was no need for her to do so. If it weren't for the paparazzi who occasionally took a few photos of the two of them, Eric wouldn't even have to wear his sunglasses. After all, he had been working behind the scenes for a long time. Although he often appeared in the media, most of the photos were edited and were very different from the real person. The paparazzi also formed a tacit understanding with the two of them. Eric's bodyguards didn't stop them from taking photos. These people also didn't rashly stop the two of them and ask questions. After walking around the Brandenburg Gate, the two of them were tired. They sat down on the benches near the fountains on both sides of the Paris Square. You must be tired. I'll get someone to inform the hotel to send a car to pick us up. After walking for so long, Carolyn, whose face was already a little rosy, nodded. She looked at Eric and waved a few words to the bodyguards nearby. When the bodyguard stopped paying attention, she said, Eric, before I came, Rachel asked me to ask about the movie you promised her last time. The timing last time was a little too good. Eric didn't intend to hide it and said, It's a story about the Titanic. That the Titanic? Carolyn asked with her eyes wide open. Eric nodded. Yes, it's the Titanic that sank on its first voyage in 1912. I think Rachel's temperament is very suitable for the image of the female lead. The main body of the movie is a love story in a disaster. The female lead, Rose, who was born a noble lady, was forced by her mother to marry an American entrepreneur. In the process of going to America to get married, Rose met the very talented Jack on the Titanic. Because of a series of events, they quickly fell deeply in love with each other. As Carolyn listened to Eric's story, a sense of déjà vu arose in her mind. She asked, "Then did the two of them end up together in the end?" Eric looked at the hopeful girl and shook his head. Carolyn bit her lower lip and couldn't help but whisper, "Why can't they be together?" "Because this is reality. In fact, Jack and Rose aren't suitable for each other. They don't belong in the same world. Although impulsive love is beautiful, it can't withstand the hardships of a dull life." Therefore, in the final setting of the story, Jack sank into the sea, but lived forever in Rose's memory. Rose also found her own belonging. A girl's thoughts were always delicate and sensitive. When Carolyn heard Eric's words, she realized that Eric seemed to be indirectly rejecting her. A strong sense of loss and bitterness uncontrollably welled up in her heart. After a while, she felt that she might have misunderstood. After all, the people around her had said more than once that she was extremely clumsy in this aspect. Thinking of this, Carolyn once again summoned some courage. Raising her head to look at Eric beside her, she said, "Eric, in fact, there's still something I haven't told you." "Oh." Carolyn gently twisted her fingers and said in a low voice, "My father asked me to invite you to my house as a guest." "There's no need." Eric looked at the delicate and pitiful appearance of the girl and carefully considered his words. "Carolyn, I'm sure you've seen some information about me in the newspapers." Carolyn immediately shook her head. "I don't believe it. Eric, they're definitely talking nonsense. You're a very good person. I've personally experienced it. I know that I'm a little clumsy in this aspect, but I believe in my feelings." In the end, Eric couldn't hold back anymore. Reaching out, he pinched Carolyn's cheeks. Looking at the blushing appearance of the girl, he said, "Silly girl. In fact, a lot of what they're saying is true." Carolyn was originally still somewhat shy. However, when she heard Eric's words, she suddenly stood up, her eyes wide open. "I don't believe it. You're definitely lying to me." In her agitation, the girl's voice couldn't help but become a little louder. Quite a few people in the surroundings looked over, and the paparazzi who discovered the situation raised their cameras one after another. Eric didn't want to be surrounded by people. At this moment, he couldn't care about anything else. Standing up, he pulled Carolyn towards another direction. The instant Eric held her small hand, the girl's imposing manner immediately disappeared. Obediently, she followed Eric towards the 17th of June Street in the west. The car sent by the hotel quickly arrived. Eric brought the girl into the car before opening his mouth once more. "Carolyn, thank you for accompanying me during this period. Being with you always makes people happy. However, I think you should return to London and return to your own life." When Carolyn thought of her previous loss of self-control, she felt both disappointed and sad. At this moment, when she heard Eric chasing her away, she couldn't hold back her tears any longer. Patter, patter, patter. When she felt Eric hand over a tissue, she didn't take it. Instead, she moved to the other side of the car, as though she wanted to draw a clear line between herself and Eric. The car quickly arrived at the hotel's parking lot. Eric instructed the driver to leave and sat in the car with Carolyn for a while. After confirming that the girl's emotions had calmed down, he brought her to the hotel. When they were about to reach the hotel's lobby, Carolyn gently tugged at Eric's lapel. When he stopped, she said in a low voice, "Eric, I'm really sorry. I lost myself a little just now. I'll return to London tonight." Eric took out a tissue and helped Carolyn wipe the tears on her face. This time the girl didn't refuse. However, her face still quickly turned red. When Eric withdrew his hand, she said in a soft voice, "Thank you." Eric sighed softly and said, "It's too late today. I'll get someone to send you back tomorrow." "Thank you," Carolyn said in a low voice again. The two of them fell into silence once more. When Eric walked into the hotel's lobby, the girl who was originally sitting on the sofa in the lounge area immediately stood up to welcome him. The girl had a head of blonde hair, a tall figure and exquisite curves. It was Claudia Schiffer, whom he hadn't seen in a long time. Eric. Claudia arrived in front of Eric and glanced at the petite girl beside him. She somewhat hesitantly slowed down her footsteps. She originally wanted to extend her hand to shake Eric's hand, but she saw that Eric had taken the initiative to extend his arms to her. The girl didn't hesitate and threw herself into Eric's embrace, kissing his cheek intimately. Eric knew that Claudia was German. However, he hadn't paid attention to the girl's whereabouts for a while. Thus, he was a little surprised to meet her in Berlin. "This is Carolyn Wilson from London." "Carolyn, this is Claudia Schiffer. I'm sure you've seen her in a movie before." Eric let go of the girl's slender waist and introduced the two girls to each other. Claudia looked at Carolyn suspiciously. The girl's expression was somewhat delicate and pitiful, but there was some hostility in her eyes. However, Claudia still extended her hand warmly to the girl. "Hello, Miss Wilson." "Hello, Miss Schiffer." Carolyn instinctively shook Claudia's hand out of etiquette that had been cultivated for a long time. However, after greeting her, the girl quickly released her hand and turned to Eric. "Eric, I'll go back to my room first." "Okay, see you tomorrow." Carolyn walked towards the elevator. The moment the elevator door closed, she saw that Eric had already intimately wrapped his arm around Claudia's waist and was walking towards the hotel restaurant. The girl bit her lips and lightly stomped her feet. "You did it on purpose. You must have done it on purpose. You bad guy." In the hotel restaurant, Eric and Claudia chose a window seat and sat down. He then asked, "Why are you in Berlin?" "I'm German. Is it strange to be in Berlin?" Claudia replied with a smile. However, she quickly explained, "I received an invitation to work with a brand, so I came over to participate in some activities." "A car brand?" Claudia rolled her eyes at him. "Do cars only exist in Germany? In my opinion, that's the case." Eric smiled and continued, "You just happened to come over. I don't speak German. Accompany me to a cocktail party tonight. It's organized by Kong Standing Film. Maybe it will bring you some good opportunities." "Okay, but I still have 2 movie contracts. I still feel that it was easier when I was a model. I've already acted in a few movies, but every time before the movie was released, they would mock me for being a vase. Please, I've already admitted it. I'm a vase. Can't they change the way they call me? Although you're so beautiful, if you want to seek a breakthrough, you can try to dress up ugly and act in a few movies." Claudia shook her head and refused. "I'm not looking forward to winning an Oscar. I'll just be a vase. I just want to appear on screen beautifully." At this time, the waiter came over. As there was a party in the evening, the two of them did not order anything to eat. They only ordered 2 cups of coffee and continued chatting. Chapter 540. Her first love that she had been looking forward to had come to an end before it had even started. The sad girl couldn't rest for the entire night. Only when the sun had risen did Carolyn pack her luggage and leave her room. She had originally planned to leave quietly, since he might not care about her anyway. The corridor of the hotel was empty. The left led to the elevator, and the right led to Eric's room. She looked around and hesitated. In the end, she couldn't resist the anticipation in her heart, and even found a reasonable excuse for herself. Leaving without saying goodbye was too rude for the upbringing she had received since she was young. Arriving at Eric's door, Carolyn pressed the doorbell and waited quietly. She quickly thought about what she should say later. Perhaps he would ask her to stay again. If that was the case, she would forgive him for what he had said yesterday. She had always thought of herself as a very forgiving girl, not to mention that she liked him so much. Then the door opened, and the tall blonde girl from yesterday afternoon appeared in front of her. The girl was wearing a simple pink silk pajamas, and the Yuan tribe's props showed that she was not wearing anything else underneath. 2 smooth and round long legs were exposed, and anyone could tell that she must have stayed here last night. "Good morning, Miss Wilson." Eric happened to be in the shower. "What can I do for you?" Claudia turned to the side and politely gestured for Carolyn to come in. She didn't show any other reaction because of the girl's weak aura. She was a very smart woman and would never take the initiative to ask about the other women by Eric's side. Carolyn stood in front of Claudia, who was much taller than her, and shrunk her neck back in self-abasement. Suppressing the sourness in her heart, she gently sniffled and said in a low voice, "Miss Heaver, I'm only here to say goodbye to Eric. Please tell him that I'm returning to London." After the girl finished speaking, she didn't wait for Claudia's reply and walked towards the elevator in a panic. Claudia looked at the girl's dispirited figure and walked back to the guest room. She knocked on the bathroom door and told Eric what had just happened. Carolyn walked out of the hotel and was about to hail a taxi when she heard a voice calling out to her from behind. Turning her head, she saw Eric chasing after her. Eric came to the girl's side and stood still. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. He buttoned up the last 2 buttons of his shirt and said, "Carolyn, I'll send you to the airport later. I'm worried about you being alone." When the girl heard Eric's words, she was a little touched at first, but she immediately turned her back in a huff. "No need, Eric, you should go back and accompany Miss Heaver. I can go back by myself." Eric buttoned up his shirt and ignored Carolyn's words. He took the girl's small luggage bag and said, "Let's go. I'll get someone to buy a plane ticket for you. Right now, it's best if you eat breakfast first. It won't do if you don't." After Eric finished speaking, he saw that Carolyn was still pursing her thin pink lips and not moving. He had no choice but to use his trump card. He reached out and grabbed the girl's small hand and walked into the hotel. The moment Eric's warm and rough hand grabbed her, the resistance in Carolyn's heart disappeared completely. She lowered her small head, her face red, and quietly followed beside Eric like an obedient child. After breakfast, Eric took Carolyn to Berlin's Schönefeld Airport in the hotel's car. He helped the girl get her ticket and even contacted Rachel, who was in London, to pick her up at the airport. He accompanied the girl all the way until the flight to London began to board. Only then did Eric feel at ease as he watched Carolyn walk into the boarding gate. When she heard the door open, Claudia, who was leaning against the sofa in the living room and watching television, propped herself up and leaned against the back of the sofa. She looked at Eric and asked, "Sent her away?" Eric nodded slightly and walked over to the girl's slender waist and leaned against the sofa. Claudia felt that Eric was a little disappointed. She couldn't help but ask, "Since you also like her, why did you let her leave?" "Because I'm a good person." Eric shook his head self-mockingly. Seeing the girl in his arms rolling her eyes, he asked, "Do you know who she is?" "How could I not know? She's the only daughter of Berkshire's Earl Wilson. I heard about it when I was in Hollywood last month. The newspapers were all saying that you were planning to marry her. When I came over yesterday, I was afraid that you would drive me away because I was a commoner." Eric gently pinched Claudia's soft waist. "Okay, stop teasing me. Have you eaten breakfast?" "Of course." Claudia giggled and rubbed against Eric's arms. "You're going out to play today. I can also be your tour guide." Eric didn't have any qualms about bringing another girl to appear in public right after sending Carolyn away. However, if they appeared in the newspapers, it would definitely embarrass Carolyn and her family. Eric originally wanted to refuse, but after thinking about it, he took out a travel album from a pile of magazines under the coffee table. After flipping through it for a while, he said, "Let's go to other cities. This way, we can get rid of the paparazzi. How about Prague?" Claudia also moved her head over. Prague was the capital of the Czech Republic and was only 200 kilometers away from Berlin. However, the girl shook her head and said, "We need to apply for a visa to go to Prague. Although it's very fast to apply for a tourist visa, we definitely can't go there today." Eric also reacted. The European Union had only been established for 2 years and only had 6 member states. After swiping his finger on the map for a while, Eric picked the Netherlands, which was also a member of the European Union. "Then let's go to Amsterdam." "Okay, I'll go change my clothes and give my agent a call. He's in Paris right now to help me negotiate an endorsement contract." Claudia stood up and walked towards the bedroom. Eric quickly flipped through the travel album and also walked into the bedroom. Claudia had already changed her clothes and was standing beside the desk. She took out her mobile phone and address book from her Chanel bag and looked for numbers. Eric casually glanced at Claudia and was about to walk towards the wardrobe when his gaze was attracted by the mobile phone in her hand. Claudia had just found her agent's temporary number and was about to call him when she felt Eric behind her. He reached out his hand and took away her mobile phone before hugging her waist. Claudia thought that Eric was suddenly interested and turned her head to glare at him. Just as she was about to take the initiative to lie on the big desk, she realized that Eric was carefully playing with her mobile phone. Claudia blushed at her thoughts and turned to face Eric. "Is there a problem?" Eric held the mobile phone in his hand and apologetically kissed Claudia's curved lips. "Sorry, baby, we might not be able to go to Amsterdam. But maybe in a few days I can take you to Finland." "What?" Claudia asked in confusion. Eric pointed at the eye-catching Nokia logo on the mobile phone. "This mobile phone is from Finland." Claudia still had a confused expression, but Eric was a little excited. He had always been thinking about Apple, but he had neglected the fact that Nokia had dominated more than 40% of the global mobile phone market before Apple's mobile phone appeared. It was also a giant with a market value of more than $200 billion. Moreover, in the original space-time, Apple had only started to rise slowly in 2007. It was too far away from the present. However, Nokia's rapid development was something that would happen in the next few years. If he could intervene now, it would be another huge fortune. Rachel was sitting in the departure lounge of Heathrow Airport, listening helplessly to the chatter of a person who was trying to strike up a conversation with her. She stared at the entrance not far away until a familiar figure appeared in her field of vision. Rachel heaved a sigh of relief, stood up, and said to the young man beside her, "I'm sorry, Mr. Luke, my girlfriend is back." Rachel deliberately emphasized the word girlfriend. After saying that, she ignored the surprised expression of the young man and walked straight to Carolyn. After approaching her, Rachel discovered that Carolyn was different. The girl's white and delicate face did not have the slightest bit of liveliness. Her thin lips were pursed into a line and her eyelashes were drooping. Her beautiful golden hair, which was originally fluffy and slightly curly, was drooping softly. Every strand of her hair looked so listless. Her small figure floated in the crowd, giving people the feeling that she was a pitiful kitten that had been abandoned by its owner and drenched in the rain. "Carolyn, what's wrong?" Rachel quickened her pace and asked with concern. When Carolyn raised her head and saw that it was Rachel, her pursed lips immediately collapsed. Her eyes were red as she threw herself into Rachel's embrace. "Woo woo woo woo. Rachel, he rejected me." Rachel, who had thought that something big had happened, breathed a sigh of relief in her heart when she heard Carolyn's words. However, she also knew that this was definitely a huge blow to this little lass who had just experienced her first awakening of love. Therefore, Rachel hugged the girl tightly and patted her back to comfort her. "Okay, don't cry. I've already told you that Eric Williams is a playboy. You were originally. Woo-woo, he's not." The girl sobbed as she retorted. Rachel felt somewhat helpless, but could only go along with the lass in her embrace. "Okay, he's not. Woo-woo, he's a bad guy." The girl quickly sobbed again. "Yes, he's a bad guy," Rachel said in agreement. Carolyn leaned into Rachel's embrace and cried for a long time before she finally stopped sobbing. She softly said, "Rachel, I miss Mommy." Rachel helped the girl wipe her face and hung her backpack on her shoulder. She took Carolyn's small hand and walked out. "Let's go. I'll take you home." Carolyn obediently followed behind Rachel. When the two of them left the airport hall, she suddenly muttered, "He held my hand." Rachel took out her keys and opened the door of her large Jaguar Monarch. She stuffed the girl into the passenger seat and said, "I know. The Daily Mail published the photo today." Carolyn looked at Rachel somewhat nervously. "Then what did they say?" "Who cares what they do? The Daily Mail is just a tabloid that likes to spout nonsense." As Rachel spoke, she started the car and turned into the highway. Carolyn saw that she was about to step on the accelerator out of habit. She didn't have time to ask and hurriedly fastened her seatbelt. "Rachel, can you drive slower? It's too dangerous." "Okay, darling. I'll listen to you today." Rachel lowered the car's speed. She had visited Carolyn's family's manor a few times before, so she didn't need the girl to give her directions. After leaving the airport area, she drove along the highway and headed northwest. After the car stabilized, Rachel carefully probed. Do you feel better? Do you want to tell me what happened? After a moment of silence, Carolyn softly said, He suddenly said yesterday that we're not suitable for each other. Rachel saw that the girl didn't say anything else after throwing out such a sentence. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart and didn't ask anything else. She knew that Carolyn still had a deep affection for Eric. At this time, she was definitely hiding something for him. However, Rachel also knew that although this girl had a weak personality, she sometimes liked to go down a dead end. Once she had decided on something, even 8 cows couldn't pull her back. The Jaguar Sovereign passed by Windsor Town and drove for more than 10 kilometers before arriving at Wilson Manor, which was located next to a tributary of the River Thames. When the manor's guard saw the car parked outside the gate, he went up to ask a few questions. However, he saw the window roll down, revealing his young lady's haggard little face. Mark, it's me. Miss, you're finally back. Madam mentioned you this morning. I'll inform her now. Oh, I'll open the door for you first. The middle-aged man named Mark respectfully greeted Carolyn. He then hurriedly opened the manor's large iron gate before walking into the security booth to pick up the phone. Although it wasn't Rachel's first time visiting this place, she still couldn't help but feel a little emotional and envious as she drove through the long corridor of Wilson Manor and looked at the large manor that was dozens of acres in front of her. The British aristocracy had long declined. The cost of maintaining traditional aristocratic manors and castles was extremely high. Because of the 75% inheritance tax in the United Kingdom, most of the economically weak aristocrats found it difficult to maintain their ancestral businesses. They had no choice but to donate a large number of manors and castles, or simply abandon them. Earl Wilson's family was one of the few aristocratic families in the United Kingdom that was still thriving. The car stopped at the side of the road. Before Rachel could get out of the car, she saw a graceful woman walking out of the castle with a few maids. Seeing her mother's figure, Carolyn hurriedly jumped out of the car and ran towards the woman. Rachel got out of the car and opened the back door. Just as she took out Carolyn's luggage, a maid came over and took the bag. At this time, Mrs. Wilson also came over with her daughter. She stretched out her hand to Rachel and said, Miss Wasey, thank you for taking care of Carolyn during this time. You're welcome, Mrs. Wilson. Carolyn is my good friend, so this is what I should do. Rachel replied politely. The reverence that the British people had for aristocrats was deeply engraved in their bones. The reason why Rachel was able to get along well with Carolyn was mainly due to the girl's pure personality, concealing the distance brought about by the aristocratic manners she had cultivated since she was young. However, Rachel still felt somewhat restrained when facing Mrs. Wilson. She could not wait to leave. Madam, since Carolyn has safely returned home, I think I should return to London. I still have some matters to attend to in the afternoon. If it's not something important, stay for lunch. Mrs. Wilson still had a gentle smile on her face. She even gently gestured for Rachel to leave. Carolyn directly stepped forward and pulled Rachel. Stay, Rachel. We talked on the phone the night before yesterday. I know you definitely have nothing to do in the afternoon. Rachel was exposed on the spot. Her cheeks were slightly hot. She really wanted to reach out and pinch this silly girl's face. Looking at Mrs. Wilson, whose smile didn't change at all, Rachel could only nod slightly. Then I'll bother you. Hearing Rachel agree, Carolyn couldn't wait to pull her to the castle. At this time, Mrs. Wilson, who was following her daughter, said, Carolyn, go and say hello to your father first. He's in the study. I know, Mother. Also, Matthew and Robert will be back for lunch at noon. The little guy will also come over. Carolyn asked in surprise, What about Charles? He went to New York a week ago. Mrs. Wilson looked at her daughter dotingly. You're too incompetent as a sister. You don't even know your brother's whereabouts. Carolyn stuck out her tongue playfully. However, she quickly retracted it under Mrs. Wilson's glare. Rachel, who was following them, only felt her scalp go numb. Due to Carolyn's talkative nature, she knew the situation of the Wilson family very well. The current Earl, James Wilson, had 3 sons and 1 daughter. The 3 sons happened to be the 3 people mentioned by the mother and daughter just now. Carolyn was the youngest child in the family. Although the Countess Edith Wilson looked like she was in her 40s, her actual age was much older because she took good care of herself. Her eldest son, Matthew, and second son, Robert, were already married and had children. Only Charles, who was 4 years older than Carolyn, was still single. However, it was said that he was already engaged. Listening to the conversation between the mother and daughter, Rachel guessed that almost everyone in this big family would be gathered at noon. Thinking of this, the uneasiness in Rachel's heart grew stronger. And reality proved that her bad feeling in her heart was not wrong at all. As noon came, more and more people came to Earl Wilson's castle. The 2 sons of the owner brought their wives and children, as well as a few other guests. This made Rachel feel a strong sense of escape. Fortunately, the considerate Mrs. Wilson seemed to have sensed Rachel's emotions. After lunch, she whispered a few words to her daughter. Only then did Carolyn bring Rachel back to her room. Chapter 541. After entering Carolyn's room, Rachel finally didn't have to pretend to be a lady anymore. Heaving a long sigh of relief, she threw herself onto the large bed in the girl's bedroom without a care for her image. She was only glad that she was wearing a long dress today. If she was wearing the loose sweater and washed jeans that she usually wore, she would probably feel uncomfortable sitting next to a room full of serious or pretending to be serious aristocrats. Carolyn didn't care about Rachel's carefree appearance on her bed. Instead, she was somewhat envious of her carefree behavior. The girl moved the small stool beside the dressing table over and leaned on the edge of the bed. Propping her chin up with her little hand, she looked at Rachel. "Rachel, are you still hungry? I saw that you only ate a little. You usually don't eat so little." Rachel turned over and faced Carolyn. Stretching out her hand, she pinched the girl's face. "You little troublemaker. I want to hurry back to London right now." Carolyn's expression immediately became somewhat perturbed. "Is there something that our family isn't good enough?" "Of course not," Rachel hurriedly denied. "I just feel that we don't belong to the same world. I feel more free in my own world." Hearing Rachel's words, Carolyn was stunned for a moment. Her long eyelashes fluttered a few times, a layer of mist appearing in her sparkling eyes. Sparkling and translucent teardrops dripped down. Seeing this, Rachel immediately panicked. She hurriedly sat up and leaned over. "What's wrong, Carolyn? Don't cry. I was just..." Carolyn once again revealed the expression of an injured kitten as she leaned into Rachel's embrace. Perhaps because they were at home, the girl didn't cry out loud. Sobbing, she said, No, Rachel. It's just that when he rejected me yesterday, he said the same thing. I just don't understand. What's wrong?" Rachel gently stroked the girl's back. Carolyn cried for a while at the airport. After returning to the manor, she seemed to have returned to her carefree state. Rachel initially thought that she had recovered from being rejected by Eric Williams. She didn't expect that the girl had only hidden her feelings in her heart. Furthermore, she hid them so shallowly that she couldn't bear to be touched at all. "Carolyn, don't cry. Tell me what exactly happened yesterday. You're so stupid, so you must have misunderstood. I'll help you analyze it." This time, the girl didn't hide anything. She told Rachel about what had happened the day before. "Yesterday, we went to the Berlin Museum Island and the Brandenburg Gate. I asked him about the movie for you, and he said it was Titanic. He told me the plot of the movie. He said Jack and Rose were not from the same world, and it was more suitable for them to have a good memory instead of being together for a long time. Then he told me to go back to my life. And that woman. She was very beautiful, prettier than me." After Carolyn finished stuttering, Rachel helped the girl tidy up her messy bangs and said, "I feel that Eric Williams thinks that you're too naive, and that you're not suitable for the Hollywood environment. That's why he rejected you. You know, Hollywood is very chaotic. But I feel that Eric, well, let's just say that he's a gentleman. That's why he didn't continue to lie to a silly girl like you. So, forget about him. Maybe you can go back to Cambridge in advance. Don't think about him anymore. Just treat him as a passerby in your life. Do you remember when we went to see Eric Williams' movie Back to 17 in our first year of university? I think there's a line that's very good. When a girl is young, she always has to experience a few bastards. Carolyn immediately interrupted Rachel. He's not a bastard. Rachel smiled. I know. He's a bad guy. Carolyn's cheeks turned red at Rachel's teasing tone. But Rachel, I just like him. Who hasn't liked someone before? Actually, I secretly liked Marlon Brando. It's a pity that he's already an old man now. You clearly know that what we're talking about is different. In essence, there's no difference. So, you should try your best to forget this matter. Maybe you can go back to Cambridge in advance. Like many times, you can dive into the library and take out a few books. Before you know it, a day will pass. Maybe you'll wake up one day and forget about him. Then you might feel that your reaction today was very silly. Carolyn silently listened to Rachel's words and said, Rachel, I don't want to study anymore. Why? Isn't your father no longer stopping you from continuing your graduate studies? It has nothing to do with Dad. I want to be like you and go out to work. I don't want to be a little girl who doesn't know anything anymore. Rachel couldn't help but pinch the girl's face again. I think it's better to forget about it. Carolyn could tell that Rachel didn't seem to have any expectations for her decision. She sniffled and said unhappily, I'll definitely do very well. I'll go out and look for a job tomorrow. Then you'll have to get your parents' approval first. I think that when they hear your decision, they'll probably ground you at home, Rachel said. Carolyn was a little girl who had been carefully protected in an ivory tower by her parents and brothers since she was young. She hadn't had much contact with the outside world since she was young. If such an innocent little girl were to be pushed into society, it would be no different from throwing a little sheep into a pack of wolves. Rachel believed that she could see this point. Carolyn's family definitely understood this as well. Last time, the girl had left home to pursue her studies in Cambridge. It was barely within the scope of the Wilson family's tolerance. However, if Carolyn were to speak of her decision, there was a 90% chance that she would be grounded by the Earl's family. She knew that aristocratic girls like Carolyn would generally choose to marry into aristocratic families or rich families. Then, like Mrs. Wilson, she would quietly become a housewife. This was the safest path for her. Carolyn seemed to understand the possible reaction of her family. She suddenly felt somewhat disappointed. She tightened her grip on Rachel's arm and suddenly said, Rachel, can you stay with me today? No, you're already 22 years old. You're not 2 years old. Rachel hurriedly refused. But if you're not here, Father and Mother will definitely ask me about Eric. I don't even know how to answer them. Rachel looked at Carolyn's pitiful little face and her heart immediately softened. Okay, but I'll definitely leave tomorrow morning. Then can you take me with you and leave? Even if I wanted to, you can't leave. I can hide in the trunk. I've read about this in books. Rachel couldn't help but laugh again. Then I'll be wanted by the London police for kidnapping and selling young girls. Eric, this is the financial situation of Nokia in recent years. Also, this is the list of some of Nokia's current shareholders. The most important one is the National Bank of Finland. There are also some German and French capital. Oh right, I also found out today that Nokia's current CEO, Joma Alala, is not in Finland. He should be in New York. It's said that he has been there for a month because of Nokia's financing. I've called back home for the specific situation and asked someone to find out. In the hotel where Eric was staying in the center of Berlin, his suite had been turned into a temporary office. There were many documents that he had collected over the past few days placed everywhere. After seeing the latest Nokia 1011 mobile phone from Claudia, Eric quickly began to ask Alan about the company's detailed information. Nokia was an ancient company with a very long history in Finland. It started with paper making at first. Later, it gradually ventured into the rubber, optical cable, telecommunications, television and other industries. In the 1980s, it was one of the largest diversified companies in Finland. Of course, this giant was only for Finland, a small northern European country with a population of only 5 million. At the end of the 1980s, because it was involved in too many fields, the group's business fell into chaos. Nokia began to decline rapidly. In 1988, Nokia's CEO, Kalle Keramo, committed suicide under the pressure of Nokia's business failure. Nokia's business became worse and worse. In just a few years, it had changed several leaders. The current Nokia CEO, Joma Alala, was originally the president of Nokia's mobile phone department. After being appointed as Nokia's leader, he began to bet all of Nokia's chips on the mobile phone department. In recent years, he had spun off many of Nokia's businesses. Nokia had successfully launched a GSM mobile phone, the 1011, which was the mobile phone that Eric saw at Claudia's place a few days ago. Eric knew that the GSM network was the main mobile phone network communication system for more than 10 years, so Joma Alala's choice of direction was not wrong. However, because of the collapse of the Soviet Union a few years ago, the economy of the Soviet Union obviously collapsed. Finland, as a northern European country close to the Soviet Union, joined the Warsaw Pact camp under the coercion of the Soviet Union a few years ago. Therefore, the economic collapse of the Soviet Union, without exception, affected Finland. Finland had been in a state of economic stagnation for several years. Although the Nokia 1011 received a good market response, Nokia was still in a difficult situation because it did not have enough development funds. From the information in front of him, Eric also found that in 1991, the year before Joma Alala took office, Nokia tried to sell the mobile phone department to Ericsson in neighboring Sweden, but it was rejected by Ericsson with an almost mocking attitude. From this, it could be seen that the entire European capital market despised Nokia. Speaking of which, in the process of reading the information, Eric found another very interesting thing. Among the three leading mobile phone giants in the world in the 1990s, except for Motorola, the other two were in several small northern European countries. Nokia belonged to Finland, and Ericsson was a Swedish company. Eric also quickly found the reason. Because the small northern European countries such as Finland and Sweden had a small population, and their territory was mostly mountainous and hilly, the cost of developing wired telephone communication in these small northern European countries was extremely expensive. This also caused these northern European countries to pay more attention to the development of wireless communication. As early as 1981, when many people were still unfamiliar with mobile phones, Finland had already built a nationwide mobile phone network. Because of the emphasis on mobile communication technology, mobile phone giants such as Ericsson and Nokia were created. I have already called Chris a few times. By the way, have you sent this information back to New York? Yes, every time I organize a piece of information, I will send a copy back to New York separately. Alan nodded and suddenly said, Eric, I think if you are interested in mobile phone companies, maybe you can try to invest in Sweden's Ericsson, or invest in the local Motorola. In my opinion, the current Nokia doesn't have much investment significance. Joma Alala had to go to the United States because he couldn't find investors in Europe. Judging from the fact that he stayed in the United States for more than a month without any news, Wall Street investors don't seem to be too enthusiastic about Nokia. Eric flipped through Nokia's financial records for the past few years and said without looking up, Motorola and Ericsson are both emerging companies. These companies don't lack layman investors like us. If we get involved now, we won't get much benefit. But Nokia is different. If we invest in Nokia now, it will be like giving charcoal in the snow to this company. Oh, you should understand what I mean by giving charcoal in the snow. Alan resisted the urge to roll his eyes and nodded. Of course I know, but since the other investors are very pessimistic about this company, I think. Alan didn't continue, but Eric didn't mind and said, You think that a layman like me definitely has no reason to intervene, right? Alan smiled awkwardly, but nodded slightly. Claudia had been acting as Eric's temporary secretary these days, and she did it with relish. Moreover, the girl also liked how Eric looked when he was working. Listening to the conversation between the two, Claudia couldn't help but say, Alan, actually, I don't think what you said is completely correct. I just happened to use Nokia's latest mobile phone product. When I returned to Europe, a good friend recommended it to me. She said that the call quality of this mobile phone is very good. Since ordinary people like us will choose this company's product because of the quality of a mobile phone, it means that this company must have its investment value. Chapter 542. When Alan heard Claudia's words, he just shrugged slightly. Eric, who was flipping through the information, noticed his assistant's small movement and shook his head helplessly. His move this time was indeed different from the past. When he invested in companies such as Cisco and AOL, the development prospects of these companies were relatively bright, and the funds involved were not too much. Even the 3 internet companies he invested in, such as Yahoo, only invested tens of millions. But the situation this time was very different. Nokia was a large group company in Finland. Although its development was in trouble, from the financial data collected, this starving camel still had about $1 billion in assets. From Eric's personal opinion, of course, the more shares the better. If he could swallow all of them, he didn't mind throwing in all of Firefly's funds. Eric stayed in Berlin for a few more days. He then moved to Paris with the main creative team of Jurassic Park to prepare for the movie's French premiere. At this time, it was already mid-July. Jurassic Park had been released in North America for 6 weeks, and the box office easily exceeded $300 million. Regarding the box office number curve of Jurassic Park, in North America that was still strong, the local media had already gone from being amazed at breaking $100 million in the first week to now being numb. There was almost no suspense that the film's box office in North America would exceed $400 million in the next few weeks, and the discussion about whether it could exceed $500 million did not seem to be that enthusiastic. After all, whether it was $400 million or $500 million, for most Hollywood films, it was like a person looking up at the stars in the sky. Very few people would think about whether a certain star was 100 light years or 1,000 light years away from them. The overseas box office of Jurassic Park also exceeded $300 million in the 6th week, and the total box office reached $600 million. The box office in the UK, which was released at the same time as North America, was particularly eye-catching. The box office in the UK reached £57 million in 6 weeks, and the total box office was expected to exceed £70 million. At the same time, Jurassic Park would also be released in France, Spain, Japan, and other overseas countries. Especially Japan. This was a country obsessed with monsters. Although Eric didn't have a specific number in his memory, the box office of Jurassic Park in Japan definitely exceeded $100 million. Although Jurassic Park was crazily collecting box office around the world, creating one box office miracle after another. But this miraculous movie didn't attract a positive response from the local media in any country. In recent months, the media in many European countries used a tone close to the wolf to evaluate Jurassic Park, and this was especially true in France, where Eric was currently based. As the birthplace of film, the French had always been very proud of their country's film industry, and French film did indeed have a very glorious period. In order to welcome the box office giant Jurassic Park and defend the dignity of French film, the French released the most expensive film in French film history, Germinal, at the same time as Jurassic Park. The film adaptation of the French literary masterpiece, Germinal, cost 164 million francs, or about $30 million. It was jointly invested by more than 10 French film companies, and could indeed be said to be the most expensive film in France so far. Eric only had one thought in his mind regarding the reaction of the French. Why bother? Germinal was about the tragic life experiences of French miners at the end of the 19th century. It was nearly 3 hours long, and could be said to be an absolutely boring film. Using such a film to compete with the entertaining Jurassic Park in box office, Eric couldn't think of a second result. Moreover, the timing was very sensitive. This year was the last year of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade Negotiations. In order to establish the World Trade Organization, after many years of wrangling, North America and Europe finally reached a consensus on most of the terms. Now the UA government was fighting for the same economic status for Hollywood films as physical products, but the European countries proposed the cultural exception argument. For this reason, some famous Hollywood directors even started a debate with European filmmakers. With Eric's current position, of course, he had to stand on the side of Hollywood. In order not to provoke the emotions of the French media, After a simple premiere, Eric cancelled most of the promotional schedule in France and sent the other main cast members to the next stop, Madrid, Spain. Anyway, Jurassic Park was already a hot topic in Europe. Reducing some of the promotional activities would not affect the French box office of Jurassic Park too much. While promoting the film, Eric had not stopped privately discussing the Nokia matter with Chris on the phone. Chris had decided to personally come to Europe with the investment team of Firefly, so Eric temporarily stayed in Paris. Compared to the resistance of the media and cultural circles to Hollywood films, the French film production and distribution companies were very eager to invest in and distribute Hollywood films. Shrewd businessmen could see that the decline of French films was irreversible. Capital chased after profits, and the French film companies certainly knew how to choose. In a hotel on the banks of the Seine in Paris, Eric sat leisurely on the balcony of the hotel. A faint steam rose from the coffee cup on the small round table beside him. From time to time, he would tap on the laptop keyboard on his lap. Occasionally, he would look up and see the tall Eiffel Tower not far away. Hearing the sound of the door, Eric looked back and saw Alan walking in with a stack of documents. Eric, the box office news for the first day of Jurassic Park, and Germinal is out. Alan put the documents in his hands on the round table beside Eric, took out a copy, and handed it to him. Eric had taken advantage of the night to walk around the streets last night. The few cinemas he passed by had the scene of parties buying tickets, so he had already expected it. He was not in a hurry to open the documents Alan handed over. Instead, he took out a floppy disk from his laptop and handed it to Alan. "This is a script idea I thought of a few days ago. Send it back to Los Angeles, and let them register the copyright." The script on the floppy disk was The Night at the Museum, that he had thought of when he had accompanied Carolyn to visit the Berlin Museum Island. In the past few days, Eric had used his free time to roughly type out the script. Alan did not ask any more questions. He kept the floppy disk and introduced the documents that had just been sent over. Then he took out an invitation from the folder. "This is from the CEO of Gaumont, Mr. Nicholas Seydoux. They are holding a celebration party for a movie tonight, and they would like to invite you to attend." Eric flipped open the box office data of Jurassic Park and Germinal. He frowned slightly and asked casually, "What movie?" "The movie is called Fragrant. I just checked. It's a romance movie. It was released at the beginning of June. The lead actors are two very famous French movie stars, Vincent Perez and Sophie Marceau. This movie has received a very good response in the European and Asian markets." Alan gave a simple introduction and did not mention the box office data of Fragrant. After all, compared to Jurassic Park, the box office of this romance movie was not worth mentioning. Eric still had a trace of helplessness between his eyebrows. After hearing Alan's introduction, he did not even think about it and asked casually based on his memory. "Sophie Marceau paid 1,000,000 francs in compensation to leave Gaumont back then. Didn't both parties fall out? Why are they working together again?" Alan did not know about this. Sophie Marceau's influence was more in France and the Far East. Hollywood had not noticed this French rose. "I'm not sure about this. Eric, do you want to check it out?" Eric was stunned for a moment before he reacted. He shook his head and said, "No need. I just suddenly thought of this." Sophie Marceau's past of falling out with Gaumont in order to film Zalaski's Wild Love appeared most of the time in the Female Stars magazine articles. In the end, it was just to beautify the female star's image. It was more of a publicity component. Moreover, 1,000,000 francs was less than 200,000 USD after conversion. For a famous European female star, it was not too big of a financial burden. Sophie Marceau and Gaumont's film company might have just been unable to come to an agreement for a while. Everyone temporarily parted ways and went their own ways. There was no possibility of them not interacting for the rest of their lives. To be more realistic, now that the European film industry was in decline, there were very few companies that had the ability to produce commercial movies. This French rose did not have many choices. Then, Alan pointed at the invitation. "Tonight's cocktail party?" Eric shook his head. He did not know what the so-called celebration party was going to be like. During this time, The French media had already hyped up the situation of the confrontation between Germinal and Jurassic Park. If the media attended, they would definitely ask about the box office of Jurassic Park and Germinal. Sighing, Eric looked at the data in his hand again. Jurassic Park's box office in France was 6 million francs on the first day. The box office of Germinal, which was on the same scale as Jurassic Park, was only a little more than 1 million. When the time came, no matter how he answered, or even if he did not answer, as long as his figure appeared in the newspapers tomorrow, there would probably be sparks. Alan could also understand some of Eric's concerns. If that's the case, I will call and reject the other party. Also, Mr. Hansen will arrive in Paris around 10 in the morning tomorrow. I have already booked the hotel room. Eric, is there anything else you want to add? Nope, that's all. Alan nodded and turned to leave Eric's room. Just as he reached the corridor, the mobile phone on Alan's waist rang. After saying a few words, Alan pushed open the door to Eric's room again and handed the mobile phone to him. Eric, Mr. Jack Valenti is calling. Jack Valenti? Eric was a little confused. Jack Valenti was the president of the American Film Association. Eric had only seen him once at the American Film Association's annual meeting last year. He was a little confused as to why Jack Valenti would call him. However, Jack Valenti had been the president of the American Film Association since 1966. He had been in this position for nearly 30 years, and it seemed that he would continue to be in this position. The political-turned-president of the Film Association had been dedicated to the expansion of Hollywood's film industry around the world, so his position in Hollywood was very respected. Eric did not neglect and quickly took the mobile phone from Alan. The two chatted briefly, and then hung up. Alan could only faintly hear that the voice coming from the phone was a little hurried, but he did not know the content. After Eric hung up the phone, he said to Alan, "Get ready. I will attend the celebration party for Fragrance, held by Gaoming Film Company tonight." Noticing Eric's solemn look, Alan asked, "Do you want me to prepare another dress for you?" "No, the one I wore at the premiere will be fine." Eric returned the mobile phone to Alan. He was still wondering why Jack Valenti appeared. Judging from the current situation, Eric expected him to be here for the general agreement on tariffs and trade that was being negotiated. The American Film Association was not only responsible for the classification of Hollywood films, but also the spokesperson for Hollywood's interests. The negotiation of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade would definitely be handled by the American Film Association. Although it also involved the interests of Firefly, Eric could not think of a reason why Jack Valenti would contact him directly. Under the night sky, the hotel's limousine slowly drove into a mansion on the banks of the Seine River in the western suburbs of Paris. As soon as Eric got out of the car, he saw a group of people greeting him enthusiastically. When Eric saw these people, he realized that this celebration party was unusual. Nicolas Seydoux of Gaoming Film was not surprised, and Jack Valenti was also invited in advance. However, he had just met the president of German Standing Film last week, and some other familiar faces. "Eric, I'm glad you could come." Nicolas Seydoux took the lead and hugged Eric warmly. He then introduced the others to Eric one by one. Needless to say, the president of Ding Film, there was also the CEO of German New World Film, the president of French Television 4, the head of the film department of Vivendi Group. What surprised Eric even more was that even the president of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, John Carey, was here, and the current actual controller of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer was French Credit Lyonnais. Generally speaking, these people were basically the heads of the top film companies in Europe. At the end of the introductions, Eric could only entertain them calmly with the thought of dealing with them as they came. "Okay guys, give me and the little guy some time," Jack Valenti said loudly after Nicolas Seydoux finished the introduction. Everyone agreed. Jack Valenti gave Eric a look, and the two walked all the way into the mansion. They passed through the crowd of guests, and came to a suite under the guidance of a waiter. "You must be very confused now, right?" Jack Valenti asked Eric to sit down on the sofa and asked with a smile. The gray-haired old man with sharp eyes in front of him was the most reliable spokesperson for Hollywood. Eric nodded without hiding anything. Although he had realized something, Eric was not worried that the other party would do something bad to Firefly Pictures. Otherwise, Jack Valenti would not have been able to hold the position of president of the Motion Picture Association of America for decades. Chapter 543. Jack Valenti's smile didn't fade as he said to Eric, "Little guy, Jurassic Park has brought me a lot of trouble during this period of time." Eric had already guessed it, so he asked, "It's about the GAT?" "Yeah," Jack Valenti nodded and said, "You should know that I've been working hard on the terms of the GAT for the past few years. Originally, many things were almost done, but since Jurassic Park was released in early June, there was a strong backlash from the European countries." Jack Valenti looked up at Eric and continued with a smile, "I've wanted to talk to you about this since last month, but you've been very elusive and I've been very busy with my personal affairs, so I couldn't find the right time. This time I finally got the chance." Eric was very clear about the final negotiation result of the GAT, so he was not too worried. He said, "Mr. Valenti, then this time." Jack Valenti waved his hand and said, "Let me finish first. Regarding the negotiation of the GAT, we, Hollywood, will not intervene in other aspects. But regarding the negotiation of movies, in addition to the normal process, because of Hollywood's absolute advantage, we also need to rope in these European film forces to speak for us. This way, we can force the European governments to agree to include movies in the final agreement of the GATT. In order to accurately find the breakthrough point, Washington even used the power of the CIB. Everyone is sparing no effort in this matter." Eric understood very well. If he was not the owner of Firefly Pictures, Jack Valenti would definitely not be so straightforward. Roping in the European film forces was ultimately about the word profit. In the face of some efforts by the European government officials, the Big Seven naturally did not have to worry about it. Hollywood was related to millions of jobs in the United States and billions of dollars of trade surplus every year, so the Washington authorities had to do their best. However, in terms of movies, the Big Seven still had to do their own efforts. The ones who had the most intense conflict with Hollywood were, of course, the local film forces of the European countries. If these people could not be appeased, then under the strong interference of such forces, even if the European governments were willing to compromise, the relevant agreements would be difficult to sign. At this time, Eric had basically guessed the reason why Jack Valenti contacted him. "Mr. Valenti, are you talking about those people outside?" Eric pointed in the direction of the hall outside the door. Jack Valenti nodded and said, "So kid, this time you have to be generous. Give these greedy guys some benefits, then they won't come out and cause trouble. Instead, they'll speak for Hollywood." Although Eric respected this old man who worked hard for Hollywood's interests, he could not be the child of wealth for no reason. "Mr. Valenti, this should be done together with Hollywood, right?" "Of course, everyone should do it together. I've already talked to Warner Brothers, Universal, and Paramount. However, you should have heard the saying, the greater the power, the greater the responsibility. Firefly's performance in the past few years has been so dazzling, it's only right for them to contribute more." Eric realized that he could not escape this time. Although this matter was not forced, if the other film companies did what they should do and Firefly refused to cooperate, they might be marked in a small notebook. Although Jack Valenti just mentioned that Jurassic Park brought trouble to his work and did not complain too much, Eric could also see the huge resistance that Jurassic Park brought to the GATT negotiations from the recent European media. He smiled helplessly and said, "Mr. Valenti, I can only say that I'll do my best. I'm not a superhero. If they ask for too much, I think it's better to let them go to the captain of the U.S. team." Jack Valenti laughed and said, "That's all I need to hear." Eric asked again, "Mr. Valenti, can I know what the conditions are from Warner Brothers?" Jack Valenti nodded and said, "Of course, the main promises include the priority of licensing the distribution rights of Hollywood movies, and receiving a certain amount of European capital to invest in movies every year. Investment in the production and distribution of Hollywood movies could be said to be the two main ways for overseas capital to enter Hollywood. The current promises were nothing more than priority and no difference. There were good and bad Hollywood movies. Movies that sold well at the box office would definitely attract more competitors in the process of overseas distribution. At this time, if they had priority, it would be easier to get the distribution contract. Indiscriminate investment was equivalent to investing a certain amount of funds into most of the movies of a film company. It was not like in the past, where the funds could only be invested in projects that the film company was not optimistic about, or invested in projects of independent production companies. This model was equivalent to sharing profits and losses with the film company. If the film company made money, the investors would definitely make money. If the film company lost money, the investors would also lose money. In recent years, there were not many film companies that lost money in the 7 major Hollywood studios. Eric thought for a moment and said, "Mr. Valenti, the distribution rights can be discussed, but the indiscriminate investment is more difficult for Firefly to accept." "These are all things that can be discussed." Jack Valenti's smile did not change. "Of course, I know about Firefly's situation." Firefly's profits last year were envied by many. However, I just want you to know, Eric. Jack Valenti changed his expression, and even changed to a more formal form of address. "This negotiation is related to the interests of the entire Hollywood, so it is definitely not the time to be stingy. If this negotiation fails, who knows when the next negotiation will reach this level of progress. The GATT has been wrangling since 1947, and has been entangled for more than 40 years. There have been many breakdowns during this period, and this is the most completed one." Eric nodded solemnly after listening. Although the 1993 GATT was successfully signed, Eric was not sure if he, the butterfly, would mess up something that should have happened. Jack Valenti noticed Eric's expression and smiled with relief. He reached out and patted Eric's knee and said, "Eric, you know, I can't force you to agree to any conditions. You're doing all this for yourselves. An old man like me won't get any benefits. Although you're very young, since you've achieved so much at such a young age, I think you must understand the pros and cons. Although the 7 major Hollywood studios have always been competitors in China, in the face of external forces, their interests are always the same. Everyone should do their best for the major events that affect the future of Hollywood." Eric could sense that Jack Valenti was being so earnest because he still felt that he was too young. He could only nod solemnly again. "Mr. Valenti, I'll do my best." "Then I'm relieved." Jack Valenti stood up and said, "I don't know their specific requirements. You'll have to communicate with them personally. Let's go, these greedy guys must be waiting anxiously." Returning to the hall outside, the banquet had already begun. Under the bright and splendid lights, the hall was crowded with people, gathered in 2s and 3s, either raising their glasses or whispering. On the dance floor, there were also pairs of men and women dancing slowly to the gentle music. However, the moment the door of a room on the west side of the hall opened, the entire hall seemed to be quiet for a second. Then the atmosphere returned to normal. The group of people who had personally welcomed Eric at the beginning also came over again. Eric's smile remained unchanged as he chatted with these people. The group of people unknowingly came to a relatively quiet corner, where a sofa was placed. The waiter served champagne to everyone one by one. As the host, Nicholas Seydoux asked, "Eric, you don't seem to have brought a date?" Because Claudia had several movie contracts with her. After signing her endorsement contract, she hurried back to Los Angeles. Even the follow-up commercials had to be shot in the studio in Los Angeles. Of course, she could not stay in Europe to accompany Eric. "Well, I don't have a girlfriend." Eric shrugged. Everyone chuckled. Nicholas Seydoux continued, "French girls are very passionate and romantic. You can talk to them more later." Eric looked at the men and women shuttling back and forth in the hall and smiled. "I want to talk to them more now." There was another burst of laughter in the corner. The group of people said a few irrelevant words. At this time, different forces were basically gathered together, and some even belonged to different countries. And in this kind of occasion, of course, it was impossible to talk about specific matters. Eric only revealed in the chat that he would continue to stay in Paris for about a week, and hinted that Firefly would cooperate with them to a certain extent. Everyone quickly dispersed in satisfaction. Jack Valenti did not stay at the party for long. In less than half an hour, the old man received a phone call, and had to leave in a hurry. Eric shuttled back and forth in the party hall, taking business cards from the people he had just met. He also made some preliminary appointments. Although the conversation did not involve any substantive issues, more than an hour still quietly passed by after these things were done. Eric was just about to rest for a while when he happened to see a black-haired girl in a black backless evening gown in the crowd. Only then did he remember the theme of tonight's party, the celebration party for Fragrant. Although Fragrant was like many French movies, the plot was a little messy as usual, but the details were exquisite everywhere. The first meeting on the rainy night, the dinner in the unfamiliar mansion, waking up on the beach, staring into the mirror, and so on, all left a deep impression on the audience. And Eric's favorite was undoubtedly the scene where Sophie danced in front of the mirror to brisk jazz music. "Hello, Miss Marceau." Eric exchanged a glass of red wine from the waiter and walked over without hesitation. When the young man who was chatting with Sophie Marceau saw Eric, he consciously raised his glass and walked away. Sophie Marceau seemed to be relieved. When she faced Eric, the irritation between her eyebrows was still clear. As the woman who attracted the most attention at the party, there were definitely many people who came over to hit on her. Although Sophie Marceau knew Eric's identity, her tone did not seem very friendly. She said lightly, "Hello, Mr. Williams. It's nice to meet you." Eric did not mind the girl's cold tone. When he looked at this French rose up close, she seemed even more pure and charming. Sophie Marceau gave Eric the feeling that she was an exquisite work of art, even in her movies. This woman was so beautiful that Eric often felt that such a stunner should not even appear in those rough art movies with blurry graphics. Noticing the expression between the girl's eyebrows, Eric asked, "Is there something bothering you, Miss Marceau?" "No, Mr. Williams." Sophie Marceau shook her head and said lightly. She even raised her glass to Eric. Eric took a sip of red wine and said, "Then let me guess. You don't like this party, do you? So what?" Sophie Marceau raised her eyebrows slightly and said. Eric smiled and said, "If that's the case, maybe I can help you solve this problem." "How?" Eric said. "How about I take you away?" "That's too rude." Sophie Marceau shook her head. Eric smiled and did not answer immediately. He gestured to Sophie Marceau and walked out of the crowd. Sophie Marceau hesitated for a moment and followed. Eric brought Sophie Marceau to avoid the crowd and came to the villa's balcony. A man and woman who were chatting on the balcony noticed them coming over. The girl was about to say something when the middle-aged man patted the girl's back and greeted Eric with a smile, before leaving with his female companion. The style of the terrace was the same as the villa. Outside the finely carved stone railings was a small garden. Under the bright street lights of the manor, it looked lush and verdant. At this time, there were also figures of 2s and 3s in the garden. Eric leaned against the stone railings comfortably and looked at the girl who could not help but take a deep breath. He said, "Do you feel much more relaxed? You don't like parties either?" Sophie Marceau asked in return. "A party is supposed to bring joy to people. No matter how bad it is, it should be able to let people relax after a whole day of work. If the whole party is filled with people who are trying to get close to you with various motives, I don't think anyone will be able to get the joy they deserve from such a party." Sophie Marceau imitated Eric and leaned against the railings. She held the glass of red wine that was almost empty in her hand. Her expression suddenly revealed a hint of a young girl's slyness. "Then what's your motive for getting close to me? I think I should know you from my previous life, so I came up to say hello," Eric said honestly. Sophie Marceau was stunned for a moment before she suddenly laughed. She was a 27-year-old woman, but her face still had some baby fat. Her smile was natural and pure. The girl raised her glass and clinked it with Eric's. She said, "Thank you, Mr. Williams. This is the most interesting pickup line I've ever heard." Eric took a sip of red wine and said, "Then what do you think my success rate is?" Sophie Marceau tilted her head and said with a smile, "From the current situation, 0. You have to know that girls hate men who use flowery words the most." Eric sighed with regret. "Looks like I have to work harder." Sophie Marceau said, "I think if you change your target, your success rate might instantly be full." Eric nodded pretentiously and looked in the direction of the hall, as if he was choosing something. Then, very coincidentally, A small figure wearing a princess dress ran towards the two of them as she stepped on the floor. It was a 7 or 8-year-old girl. She was small and had a fair and tender baby face. Eric, you're Eric, right? The director of the dinosaur movie? The girl was not interested in Sophie Marceau at all. She pounced in front of Eric, raised her small face, and asked in French without any fear of strangers. Eric did not know much French. He only knew some very simple daily communication terms. In his current situation, he did not have much time to specifically learn French. In the entire party, most of the people who spoke to him would take the initiative to speak in English. If not for the girl's pronunciation of Eric being exceptionally clear, Eric would not even know what the girl was saying. Helpless, Eric could only look at Sophie Marceau for help. Sorry, Sophie, I don't know much French. Can you help me translate? Of course. Sophie nodded and said, the little guy is asking you if you're the director of the dinosaur movie. When the girl saw that Eric ignored her and started chatting with Sophie, she immediately pouted unhappily and mumbled a few more sentences in French. This time, Eric could not understand her at all. Sophie smiled and continued to translate. She said, you're really rude. You're actually treating a little lady with such an unfocused attitude. Eric looked at Sophie innocently. Then how should I answer her? Sophie smiled, pointed at Eric, and said a few sentences in French to the girl. Seeing the little guy say a few more sentences, Sophie smiled with interest and said to Eric, she said she forgave you. She also said you're really stupid. She could speak very fluently when she was 2.5 years old. You're already in your 20s. But you still haven't learned it. Chapter 544. Eric didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he heard Sophie's translation. Children's logic was always unreasonable. The little girl in the princess dress in front of him was obviously a French-centric like many proud French people. She naturally felt that others should learn French instead of adapting to others. Although France and Britain were separated by the sea, the French's English level was at the bottom of the entire Europe. This could be seen from the unanimous backlash from French employees and tourists when Disneyland in Paris used English as a working language. Sophie thought the little girl was very interesting. She bowed slightly and said something to the little girl. But perhaps it was the natural rejection of beautiful women. The little girl was not interested in Sophie at all. Instead, she gently rolled her eyes at her. Eric saw Sophie's slightly embarrassed expression, but he didn't ask about the content of the conversation. Instead, he said to the little girl, I still don't know your name. Although she had just used her taunting skill on Sophie, the little girl didn't treat her as an outsider at all. When she heard Eric speak, she looked at Sophie again. Sophie had no choice but to translate. She said her name is Leah. Eric was about to praise the little girl's name out of habit, but he quickly reacted. This was the Saito family's mansion. A little girl who could freely walk around this kind of party, without an adult following her, was basically the child of the owner. So, the little girl's name was on the tip of his tongue. Leah Saito. Eric carefully looked at the little girl's appearance. There were indeed some traces of her in his memory. In the original space-time, several major Hollywood film companies were tilting more and more resources into big-budget movies, which caused Hollywood to leave fewer and fewer opportunities for newcomers. Therefore, the second generation of Hollywood was more obviously exposed to the public. For various reasons, the film companies were also very willing to give opportunities to these second generation with a certain level of popularity. Hollywood men usually had a very long shelf life, so it was destined that this batch of successful second generation were mostly women. Leah Seydoux was one of them. In the original space-time, the little girl in front of him not only frequently appeared in the movies of legendary Hollywood directors such as Woody Allen, Quentin Tarantino, and Ridley Scott, but also got important roles in various commercial blockbusters such as Mission Impossible 4, 007, Ghost Rider, and so on. Such resources were enough to make ordinary actresses with both good looks and acting skills in Hollywood go crazy with jealousy. Leah Seydoux, who was still a little girl of 7 or 8 years old, noticed that Eric's mind had wandered off again. A look of dissatisfaction appeared on her face again. After mumbling some French words, she turned around and ran toward the hall without looking back. Sophie gloated as she translated. She said, "You're really rude, and she's decided not to watch your movies anymore." Eric stared at the little girl's back and laughed. "Did I lose a fan?" "That seems to be the case," Sophie chuckled. The sudden appearance of the little girl made the unfamiliarity between Eric and Sophie dissipate a lot. As a time traveler, Eric not only had most of Sophie Marceau's movies stored in his memory, but he also knew much more about Sophie than the girl herself thought. Therefore, Eric could easily grasp the topic that Sophie was interested in. Under Eric's subtle attacks, the French rose showed an expression of having found a confidant in her in less than an hour. "Eric, you're so right. I also think that marriage is just a kind of restraint. Of course, people who love each other have to be together, but if they don't love each other anymore, there's no need to continue to be entangled. It will only make both parties feel pain, so I never plan to get married." Sophie drank a few more glasses of red wine while chatting. At this time, the girl already looked slightly tipsy. When she said these words, her brows were slightly furrowed, as if she was thinking of something troubling her. Many things were easier said than done. How could it be so easy to say that you don't want to be entangled? A waiter dragging a tray passed by. When Eric saw that Sophie was about to take red wine from the waiter again, he reached out his hand to stop her and motioned for the waiter to leave. "I don't think you should drink anymore," Eric softly advised. Sophie frowned slightly, but quickly showed a beautiful smile. "Hey, Eric, don't you want me to get drunk?" "Of course, I've even thought about your program, after you get drunk." Eric lazily leaned on the railing again. "So, I'm just provoking your reverse psychology now to make you drink more." Sophie stared at Eric in disbelief, then laughed as if there was no one around, attracting the attention of many people in the hall. Fortunately, the girl did not completely lose her mind. After laughing a few times, she quickly restrained her expression. "Eric, you're a very interesting person. You have to know that arousing a woman's curiosity is often the first step for a man to seduce a woman." Sophie's clear eyes widened a little. She moved closer to Eric and asked like a naive little girl, "What's the second step?" "The second step." Eric leaned forward slightly, reached out, and easily grabbed the girl's delicate chin. In the other party's eyes, which were mixed with panic and eagerness, he kissed her without hesitation. Waking up in the slight coolness of the morning in Paris, Eric felt a warm body carefully trying to escape from his embrace. His arm habitually grabbed the woman back, and he opened his eyes when the woman exclaimed in surprise. Sophie's body stiffened for a moment, and there was a slight tremble in her voice. "Eric, you're awake?" "Yeah, good morning, Sophie." Eric leaned over and kissed the woman gently on the face. Sophie felt that Eric had changed into a comfortable position with his arms around her. It seemed that he wanted to continue sleeping. She leaned against the man's warm embrace reluctantly. After a few more minutes, Sophie resolutely removed Eric's hand from her waist, sat up, and began to put on her clothes. Seeing Eric leaning against the bed and watching her movements, Sophie felt shy, which she rarely felt when shooting certain scenes in the past. After putting on her clothes and tying her messy hair into a simple ponytail, the girl looked more natural. She looked around the spacious bedroom, looking for her handbag. "You should have left it in the living room," Eric suddenly said in a gentle tone. "Thank you, Eric." Sophie paused and said, "I was very happy last night, but now I think I have to go." Eric showed a sad expression. "Seeing that I was played by you all night, don't you want to leave a kiss?" Sophie's face was slightly red, and she chuckled. She leaned over the bed and quickly kissed Eric on the lips. She quickly ran away and slipped all the way to the bedroom door before saying goodbye to Eric. A moment later, the sound of the door closing came from the living room, and the suite was quiet again. Eric smiled for a moment, then began to get dressed and got up. He could understand Sophie's struggle just now, so he didn't force her to stay. This was a woman who was extremely unrestrained. Forcing too much would only make her run further and further away. It was better to let nature take its course. Anyway, there was still a long way to go. Chapter 545. After Sophie left, Eric hurriedly washed up and went to the hotel's restaurant for breakfast. Things had been extremely complicated in the past few days. Not only was the Firefly Investment Company team led by Chris coming to Paris today to discuss the acquisition of Nokia Group, but Eric also had to follow the agreement with Jack Valenti last night to give these local European film forces some benefits, so that these local tyrants would not come forward to obstruct the GATT negotiations. Also, he could not completely let go of the promotion of Jurassic Park. As Eric's first assistant, Alan sorted out the pages that Eric needed to pay attention to in advance as usual. When he saw Eric appear in the restaurant, he put a stack of newspapers on his table. "Eric, I think you should take a look at this." Alan pointed at the weekly on the top. Eric picked it up. It was a news weekly in France. Although Alan only made comments in English on the key pages, Eric could still understand why he wanted him to pay attention to this newspaper. Because this news weekly used an entire page to publish a picture of a Tyrannosaurus Rex rampaging through the city of Paris, and the title was conspicuously marked Culture, America's Attack. Eric did not need to read the content to be able to guess what the article was talking about. The most expensive film in French history, Germinal, failed miserably in front of Jurassic Park. With an investment of more than 160 million francs, it only earned 1 million francs on the first day. It was estimated that the first week's box office would only be about 5 million francs. This figure was not even as high as the box office of Jurassic Park in France. It was understandable that the French would have such a reaction. Eric quickly flipped through the next few newspapers and lost the mood to read. Today, whether it was French or English newspapers in France, they were all talking about the box office of Jurassic Park. However, thinking of the party last night, Eric couldn't help but sneer with a slight sneer. Even the local film forces in France were privately defecting to Hollywood. What was the use of these media clamoring desperately? In the end, nothing could be decided. Putting aside today's newspaper, Eric ordered, "Call the manager of the French branch and ask him to do appropriate crisis PR. We don't need to worry about anything else." Alan quickly wrote down Eric's instructions on the memo and said, "Mr. Hansen's flight will arrive at Charles de Gaulle Airport about 10 o'clock. I've already arranged a few cars. Do you want to pick him up in person?" "I'll go there myself." Eric nodded. In the departure hall of Charles de Gaulle Airport, the flight that Chris and the others took landed nearly a quarter of an hour later than expected. Noticing Chris's figure appearing at the exit of the VIP passageway, Eric waved at him with a smile and greeted him. After getting closer, Eric found that Chris's entourage was behind him, and the one walking beside him was a middle-aged man who had nothing to do with Firefly's investment. The middle-aged man was about 40 years old, and wore a pair of rimless glasses. At first glance, his mediocre appearance gave people a clumsy feeling. However, Eric did not despise this middle-aged man at all because he had seen his photo more than once in relevant information. This person was Yoma Alala, the current CEO of Nokia. Although his appearance was ordinary, Yoma Alala's resume was not mediocre at all. Not only did this person have a double master's degree in economics, but he also served as an executive of Citibank in his early 30s. In the original space-time, it was under his leadership that Nokia went from a company on the verge of bankruptcy to the position of global communications equipment overlord. "Eric, long time no see." Chris hugged Eric and quickly took the initiative to introduce him. "I think you must know him, Mr. Yoma Alala." Yoma Alala took the initiative to step forward and shook hands with Eric. "Mr. Williams, I'm Yoma Alala. It's nice to meet you. I like your movies very much." "Thank you, just call me Eric." Eric let go of Yoma Alala's hand, and did not care about the other party's slightly scrutinizing smile. He turned and greeted the Firefly investment team members brought by Chris. Everyone left the airport, and Eric got into his car with Chris. As soon as the car started, Chris could not wait to open the suitcase he carried with him. "Eric, according to the information you sent back to New York, I once again asked people to evaluate Nokia." Eric interrupted Chris and smiled as he pointed to the car behind him. "You haven't told me what happened to Yoma Alala. Why did he come to Paris with you?" Chris smiled and temporarily closed the suitcase. He said, "I practically picked him up from New York. I know Yoma Alala went to Wall Street to invest in Nokia, But the situation shouldn't be as bad as you said, right? As far as I know, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and other major investment banks are not very interested in investing in Nokia, because Boston Consulting Group published a report more than a year ago, claiming that Nokia's mobile phone business is completely unable to compete with Motorola and Japanese mobile phone manufacturers. In the end, Lehman Brothers, which had just gotten rid of the control of American Express, was interested in investing. However, Lehman Brothers is now very short of funds, and the conditions they offered were relatively harsh. When I contacted Yoma Alala, he had already negotiated with the manager of Lehman Brothers' investment department for a month, and the negotiations had not broken down. From this point of view, this person is indeed very capable, but at the same time, he has become a hindrance to our acquisition of Nokia. Since he won't easily compromise with a giant like Lehman Brothers, that means he won't easily compromise with us either. Eric asked, then did you get the details of the negotiations between him and Lehman Brothers? Chris nodded slyly. Of course, Chris said as he opened the suitcase, took out a few documents, and handed them to Eric. The dispute between Yoma Alala and Lehman Brothers is mainly focused on the size of the capital injection and the timing of the listing. Lehman Brothers initially only agreed to invest $50 million, but they wanted to take 10% of Nokia shares. In addition, Lehman Brothers' conditions were to help Nokia get listed in 3 years, but Yoma Alala hoped that Lehman Brothers could directly get Nokia listed in order to extract development funds from the stock market. Eric read the documents in front of him and wondered, why is he in a hurry to get listed? If Nokia's development prospects are good, wouldn't he be able to get more benefits by getting listed later? I also asked someone to analyze this, Chris explained. Most of Nokia's shares are currently concentrated in the hands of a few banks in Finland. This means that any major business adjustment by Nokia requires the approval of the shareholders of the banks. This situation also causes Nokia's management to have limited room to act independently. But if Nokia can be listed in North America, Nokia will become a company with public shares. This way, the management will have more room to act. They only need to be responsible to the shareholders, and they won't have to listen to the orders of the shareholders of the banks. In the end, he still wants more power, right? Chris nodded. Yes, so when I first contacted Yoma Alala, he wasn't too enthusiastic about Firefly's investment. I was worried that if he continued to talk with Lehman Brothers, they would suddenly reach a cooperation agreement, so I revealed some information about Cisco to him. Only then did he agree to go back to Europe with me. Although Firefly investment hid Cisco's shares among several investment funds, it was still the largest shareholder of Cisco. However, other than the necessary personnel and financial supervision of Cisco, Firefly investment did not intervene much in the company's operations. Eric knew that Yoma Alala probably saw this. Speaking of which, last week, Cisco completed the merger of COC Communications and expanded Cisco's business into the Catalyst 5000 switch field. After this merger, our shares have slipped to 31%. However, according to the stock price before the close last Friday, Cisco's current market value has reached $5.3 billion. The detailed information is still being sorted out by the headquarters. Once it's done, it will be sent to your email. I'm just giving you a brief summary. Eric nodded to show that he understood. Ever since President Clinton came to power and announced the Information Superhighway Plan, the stock prices of computer-related companies had skyrocketed in the past 6 months. Cisco's stock price had more than doubled since the beginning of the year. Although the craziest time for internet technology stocks had yet to arrive, this trend had already attracted the attention of a large number of Wall Street investors. After Chris finished speaking, he quickly took out a delicately wrapped gift box from his suitcase. Here, the second thing, someone asked me to bring you a gift. Eric did not notice the smirk on Chris's face. He opened the wrapping paper with some confusion and found a 32 by 32 photo frame inside. In the photo, 2 chubby little guys were sitting on the sofa. The little boy was staring at the camera with his eyes wide open. The little girl, who looked very much like Joanna, was restlessly reaching out her little hand as if she wanted to grab something. When Eric saw the photo, He remembered that the two little guys were born on April 10th. A few days ago, it was the 3-month anniversary of the two little guys' birth. He had forgotten about this matter, and had not called back in the past few days. It seemed that Virginia must be very angry, so she asked Chris to bring him a gift. Chris said, "On the day of Kevin's baptism, Emily and I were also there. I am now the little guy's godfather. I thought you would definitely know, so I didn't inform you. The day before yesterday, Emily went to visit the two little guys and brought back this thing. She asked me to give it to you. Only then did I know that you haven't called back in the past few days." Western children would generally be baptized a few months after birth. Eric did not expect Virginia to do it directly without discussing it with him. He smiled awkwardly. Then he realized something and asked, "Kevin's baptism? What about Xiaxia?" Chris spread out his hands and said, "This should be something you and Joanna should discuss." Noticing Eric's puzzled expression, Chris said, "Joanna is a Jew. Jews follow their mother. Traditionally, Xiaxia should also be considered a Jew. In terms of bloodline, she can also be considered as an Englishwoman. Most Englishmen believe in Christianity. So you and Joanna should discuss which religion to let the little guy follow." Eric felt a little strange and murmured, "My daughter is actually a Jew." After knowing Eric for so long, Chris also realized that Eric was a person who was very insensitive to race. Therefore, he also knew that Eric's words just now did not mean any discrimination. He smiled and said, "Yes, if you let Xiaxia take over your job in the future, she will definitely be very popular in Hollywood." "I just feel a little strange." Eric also smiled and said, "What about you, Chris? Which ethnic group is your family?" Chris said, "My family is Norwegian immigrants who migrated from the era of the Great Voyage. Now we should be considered an American." "Norway, I thought Hansen was also a British surname," Eric said with a smile. "The arrogance in the bones of the British," Chris joked and then explained, "the surname Hansen means son of Hans. If you read fairy tales, you will find that the name Hans often appears in Nordic fairy tales. Norway is one of the 5 Nordic countries." Eric put away the photos of the two little guys and said, "Well, let's not talk about this for the time being. Let's go back to Nokia." Chris nodded and took out a few documents from the suitcase. "These are some comparative tests I commissioned Cisco's technical department to do. The communication method used by Nokia completely suppresses most mobile communication devices at this stage. Now, the mainstream mobile phone uses analog signals because it uses pulse signals. It is very easy to interfere with the transmission process and cause distortion in the call quality. In fact, many mobile communication equipment companies are researching new communication systems. From the test results given by Cisco's technical department, the digital signal used by Nokia's 1011 mobile phone is very stable. This signal uses the same binary principle as a computer. There is no distortion in the transmission process at all. So, I think that if the GSM network used by Nokia can be promoted, it will cause a huge change in mobile communication equipment. Nokia, who is the first to introduce the GSM system, will also gain a great advantage. If we don't want our investment to go down the drain, the first thing we have to do after the acquisition is to lobby European countries to fully adopt the GSM system." Eric said, "This seems to be something to do after the acquisition, right?" Chapter 546. Since you have made up your mind, of course, I have to consider the long term. Chris smiled and said, "As for the acquisition, the information you have collected is very comprehensive. Although Nokia's 1011 mobile phone has been selling well recently, Nokia's own difficulties have not been solved. Plus, we have the advantage of capital, so acquiring Nokia is not a big problem. What we need to discuss is the acquisition method. Eric, if you fully acquire it, the premium will be very high, and your original plan to acquire the TV network will be hindered. Now, among the 4 major TV networks in North America, Fox is developing the fastest, so it will definitely not be sold. The market value of the other 3 TV networks is more than $10 billion US. If you use the stock exchange method, you will even lose the absolute control of Firefly." In fact, Eric had been thinking about these issues. A windfall like the Gulf War would definitely not happen a second time. When the IT stock boom, it would take a few more years to make money, but the acquisition of the TV network should be done as soon as possible. Eric vaguely remembered some data. In the original space-time, the order of the merger of the three major TV networks in North America was ABC, CBS, and NBC. In 1996, Disney completed the acquisition of ABC for about $19 billion, but only 3 years later, in 1999, Viacom spent $37 billion to acquire CBS. The scale of the two TV networks was not too different. The reason for this situation was mainly because of the rapid economic growth in the United States in the 1990s, which caused the stock price to rise. Chris, with the current performance of Firefly, do you think it is feasible to use the method of issuing corporate bonds to acquire the TV network? Chris thought for a moment. Eric did not hide many of his plans. If they followed the plan completely according to Eric's communication with him, Firefly could raise about $5 billion in cash during the negotiation process of acquiring the TV network. However, if they wanted to acquire any of the three major TV networks, to be safe, the capital scale was about $15 billion. 15 billion minus $5 billion. Thinking of this, Chris suddenly opened his eyes wide and looked at Eric in disbelief. Issuing $10 billion of corporate bonds, Eric, you are really crazy. Not to mention $10 billion of debt financing. Even in the world until 1993, there were very few mergers and acquisitions that involved more than $10 billion of funds, not to mention issuing $10 billion of corporate debt to acquire a company. This could only be described as crazy. Eric did not mind Chris's shocked expression. He said, Chris, think about it from another angle. We all know about MGM's current situation. MGM's current assets are around $1 billion to $1.5 billion, but the company's debt is as high as $1.7 billion. The debt ratio is more than 100%. But if Firefly completes the acquisition of the television network, it will have no problem reaching $30 billion. Then, with the current debt, it will only be less than 40%. But Eric, a debt of $1 billion and a debt of $10 billion, is no longer a simple matter of numbers. Of course, Eric knew this. Investors usually bought corporate bonds because the risk of bonds was relatively low. They didn't have to bear the risk brought about by the ups and downs of corporate performance like stocks. Therefore, the larger the amount involved, the more cautious the investors would be. Even a giant like General Motors Group had not discovered $10 billion of corporate debt at once. However, Eric was full of confidence. In his memory, when Disney acquired ABC TV in the original space-time, they successfully completed $10 billion of debt financing. Moreover, Firefly Pictures' current operating situation was much better than Disney's in the parallel space-time. Chris, perhaps for other companies, issuing $10 billion of corporate debt at once is indeed a large amount of money to make Wall Street investors flinch. But Firefly Pictures is different. Last year, Firefly Pictures' net profit was close to $1 billion. And this year, Jurassic Park, The Bug Crisis and Clash of the Worlds, the net profit from the box office of the three movies will reach $500 million. And this is only a part of the movie's overall operation. This kind of profitability is enough to dispel the concerns of most investors. Chris was about to speak when the car suddenly stopped. Eric looked out of the window and found that the car had stopped in the hotel's underground parking lot. Chris put the documents back into the suitcase and said, Eric, I will pay attention to this matter. When I return to New York, I will find time to do a feasibility assessment. Yoma Alala may return to Finland in the afternoon, so we only have one lunch time with him. Let's focus on Nokia first. Eric nodded and got out of the car. It was almost noon when Chris and the others were settled. Eric and Chris hosted a banquet for Yoma Alala in a nearby restaurant on behalf of Firefly. According to the discussion between Eric and Chris, Firefly Investment would issue an acquisition offer to Nokia within 3 days. Before the acquisition was completed, they and Yoma Alala would be on opposite sides for the time being. Therefore, the conversation between the two sides at this luncheon did not involve too many substantive issues. Eric just talked to Yoma Alala about why he was interested in Nokia, and Yoma Alala talked about the prospects of digital mobile phones and the Global Mobile Communication Network, GSM. In the end, both the guests and the host enjoyed themselves. Yoma Alala returned to Finland in the afternoon and had a preliminary communication with the current shareholders of Nokia Group's major banks. Eric and Chris rented the hotel's conference room and began to discuss the specific acquisition plan. Although Nokia Group had divested or sold the loss-making paper, rubber and television businesses in recent years, as a once diversified Finnish giant, in addition to the mobile communication equipment department, Nokia Group also owned other businesses such as energy, pharmaceuticals, and cables. This part of the assets had been in a profitable state and had not been divested or sold. It accounted for about 1/3 of the group's total assets. Although mobile communication companies in some European countries had begun to operate the GSM network, and thus increased the sales of Nokia's first GSM mobile phone, 1011, the GSM network had not been fully popularized. In addition to the huge investment in research and development in the early stages, although the GSM mobile phone had a bright future, Nokia's mobile phone department was still in a state of loss. The funds had been fed back by other profitable departments. Except for Eric, who was a traveler, no one could predict the explosive growth potential of GSM mobile phones in the next few years. Without seeing actual profits, the shareholders of Nokia Group would not tolerate this situation to continue. This was also the reason why Yoma Alala urgently needed external investment. Everyone knew that energy and pharmaceuticals were industries full of huge profits, but Eric was not interested at all. After all, in terms of scale, Nokia's businesses were nothing in front of those giants. After a detailed discussion, Eric finally decided that the most important plan was to acquire Nokia's mobile communication department. This department not only included the mobile phone business, but also the communication equipment business. It mainly produced base station equipment for the GSM network. As the first country to use the GSM network, Nokia's technology in this area was much more advanced than other communication equipment manufacturers. The next afternoon, Eric and Chris walked out of the conference room together. Chris still had a stack of documents in his hand and said, "In order to develop GSM mobile phones, Nokia Group has been losing money for the past 2 years. That is to say, Nokia invested all the profits generated by those profitable departments into the development of GSM mobile phones. Now that the results are out, I think that as long as Nokia's shareholders have a little foresight, they will not sell the mobile communication department to us. Who knows? Maybe Nokia's shareholders are in a hurry to cash out," Eric said. "But no matter what, we have to at least get absolute control of Nokia." This was the bottom line of the acquisition that the team had discussed over the past 2 days. Chris also nodded in agreement and said, "Then, I will send a formal acquisition offer to Nokia tomorrow morning." Also, regarding the name of the offshore investment fund that we just discussed, you can name it. Because the tax rates in each country were different, in the process of cross-border acquisition, the circulation of large sums of money would always involve tax issues. The usual solution was to inject the funds into an offshore company, and then invest through the offshore company. At the same time, this kind of offshore investment could also play the role of hiding assets. Although it was only 1993, because of the various conveniences of offshore investment, the scale of funds in various offshore capital centers around the world had exceeded $1 trillion. Eric remembered the 2 little guys' voices when he was on the phone in New York yesterday. He quickly said, "Let's call it the Hawaii Fund." Chris nodded and smiled. "Do you prefer daughters?" "Yeah, haven't you heard of that saying? The son is the father's enemy in the previous life, and the daughter is the father's lover in the previous life. There seems to be such a saying, and I think it's quite scientific. For a long time, my relationship with my father wasn't very good, but Emily and her father have always been very harmonious. Perhaps you don't know, but I've had a few arguments with Emily's father, and she's always stood on her father's side," Chris said with a smile, then said, "Then I'll have someone register this name." Eric nodded. The meeting room was at the bottom floor of the hotel. The 2 of them came to the end of the corridor. The rest of the team went directly to the restaurant for dinner, but Eric had to go upstairs to change his clothes. Chris also had something to do in his room. While waiting for the elevator, Chris asked curiously, "Which company is the appointment tonight?" In addition to Nokia, in order to cooperate with the negotiations of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, Eric also had to discuss cooperation with the European film industry. The biggest shareholder of MGM is Credit Lyonnais. The two movies released by MGM during the summer season have suffered huge losses. Credit Lyonnais failed to auction MGM last year, and now they want to get rid of MGM even more. But before they get rid of MGM, they hope that MGM's performance will recover, so that it will be easier for them to find another company. When the elevator door opened, Chris and Eric moved aside to let the guests in the elevator leave. Chris pressed the button and asked, "Have you never thought of buying MGM?" "Of course I want to. I am very jealous of MGM's huge film library. If I can get MGM's film library, not only will I be able to fully utilize Firefly's current operating resources, but it will also be greatly beneficial for the future development of the television network. After all, the television network still needs a lot of high-quality content. But other than the film library, there is nothing in MGM that can tempt me." In the change of hands in 1986, Ted Turner only kept MGM's film library before 1948. This was also the reason why Time Warner's Turner Broadcasting started to broadcast MGM's old movies in recent years. However, MGM still owned the rights to more than 4,000 movies and even more TV series. The film library was second only to Time Warner. But because of MGM's continuous losses for many years, this once glorious movie giant could not fully utilize its huge film library. It could only continue to struggle in the vicious cycle of borrowing and continuous losses. Chris said, "Isn't there still the rights to 007? With MGM's current debt scale, according to the annual interest rate of 5%, the annual debt interest payment is as high as 80 million yuan. On average, MGM releases a 007 movie every 2 years. The profit generated is not even enough to pay the interest of the company's debt. That's why MGM has been losing money these years, and the debt is increasing." Eric casually talked about MGM. Suddenly he had an idea. He could not help but kick the elevator wall with the tip of his foot. He said excitedly, "I suddenly thought of a good idea." Chris looked at him in confusion. Compared to a giant like Credit Lyonnais, these European film companies are all small fish and shrimps. If Credit Lyonnais is the matchmaker, and MGM is the carrier, Firefly will be able to get out of this matter. There is no need to interrupt the established operating track. Chris already knew what Firefly had to do to cooperate with the GATT negotiations. After listening to Eric's words, he immediately understood what he meant. Originally, many of Firefly's production plans for next year, and even the year after, had been confirmed. In order to cooperate with the GATT negotiations, Firefly needed to share some of its resources with the European film forces. Then, Firefly's established development plan must be adjusted accordingly. But if Firefly indirectly cooperated with the European film companies through MGM, the headquarters would not need to make too many adjustments. However, Chris was not very optimistic about Eric's idea. "You just said that MGM's current annual profit may not even be enough to pay the interest of the company's debt. I think those European film companies will not be unaware of this. Do you think they will agree? Then invite all parties to sit down and negotiate. With MGM's current situation, I think as long as we can lead the company out of the predicament, those creditors will also agree to temporarily give up some interests. Otherwise, once the company goes bankrupt, MGM's assets will not even be enough to repay its current debts. The biggest problem for MGM now is that they do not have enough funds to start more film projects. The creditors have demands, the European film companies have funds, and Firefly can provide high-quality film projects. These conditions can almost revive this dead film company. Do you think they will be tempted? Chris nodded, but said, "Didn't you just say that you are tempted by MGM's film library? If MGM really came back from the dead as you said, you'll have to pay a higher price to acquire this film company in the future." You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.